Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku stumbled upon the Sludge villain's other victim. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Today was the worst day in the history of bad days. It seemed fitting that this was the one way Izuku beat Kaken. Not only had school been, school, but the teacher just had to ruin Kaken's good mood by reminding him of Izuku's heroic dream. In front of the whole class. Izuku really shouldn't have expected anything different. Kaken, of course, took Izuku's desire to be a hero as a personal affront and burned his notebook before tossing it in the fountain. Then he'd said. Izuku shook his head violently, tears pricking the corners of his downcast eyes. Downcast because every time he looked up his eyes wandered to rooftops. He wasn't sure if that was the worst part of today, or if it was what came after. Being suffocated and drowned in an underpass by a villain, then rescued by All Might, then crushed by that same hero when Izuku dared to ask the only question that ever mattered since he was 4. Izuku should have known better, really. He didn't even believe in himself anymore. Why should someone else? Izuku let his shoulders sag in resignation as he kept putting one foot in front of the other. He had no idea where to go from here, but he knew where his feet would take him if he stopped moving. He'd stood on that rooftop a long time after All Might left. His dream was broken, but something in him refused to give up on everything else too. A metallic thud startled Izuku from his day's trek. He jerked his head up, whipping it around to look for the source of the sound, tense to run. Had his bullies really laid in wait for him this long after school let out? Wasn't Kaken's talk earlier enough? How did they even learn he took this route? He'd picked it specifically for the lack of people. When he finally located the source of the noise, he froze. He'd stopped at the mouth of an alley, and at the far end, the Sludge villain was in the middle of drowning a middle-aged woman. Horror crawled up Izuku's spine and squeezed his lungs in sympathy. All Might caught the villain. So how? Izuku paled as he realized this was his fault. All Might must have dropped the bottles while making sure Izuku didn't fall on their cross-city jump. Izuku's eyes refused to leave the woman as she struggled to no avail. Finally, the pair shifted enough for Izuku to get a look at her face. Her eyes were wide and filled with fear, panic, and pain. Izuku had seen eyes like those too many times on the playground when he was little. He'd always stepped in then, putting himself between Kaken and whoever he was hurting. Izuku found his feet moving before he could even begin to think. There wasn't much to think about anyway. Even if he couldn't be a hero, he was going to continue stepping between bullies and their victims. That was something he'd always been able to do. But to step between these two, he first had to create space between them. Izuku threw his backpack at the Sludge villain with all the strength he could muster, yelling to draw the villains. Attention! The amorphous man turned to get an eyeful of textbooks and pencils as they flew from where Izuku had forgotten to zip the bag shut. You again? Oh! While the Sludge villain reeled and squinted, how did that even work when he didn't have eyelids? Izuku clawed at the sludge covering the woman's face, trying to free her airway. He never thought victory could sound like a wet cough, but that had to be the best sound he'd ever heard. The moment of success was short-lived, however. The sludge condensed around Izuku's wrists, suddenly clinging too tightly for Izuku to pull away. It squeezed painfully as the villain leveled him with a slightly bloodshot glare. You little punk! I'll deal with you in a minute. The slime wrapped around his wrists lifted him in the air before flinging him. Izuku hit the opposite wall of the alley. The air rushed from his lungs, and his head spun and throbbed from where it contacted brick. He slid down the wall to land on a pile of garbage bags and tried to blink the spots from his vision. A muffled scream sent a shot of adrenaline through him, and the world snapped back into clarity. Mostly. The Sludge villain was smothering the lady again. Izuku attempted to climb to his feet but fell back when the garbage bags shifted under him. Stop, he said, voice sounding small in his own ears. Stop hurting him, Kaken. The funny thing with Izuku stepping between a victim and their bully? He'd never been able to fight off a bully, but he could make himself their target long enough for the other kid to get away. Stop! Izuku said with more force. When the villain still didn't respond, Izuku steeled himself and yelled as loud as he could, "Stop! Take me instead!" The sludge villain and the woman both blinked in surprise and stared at him. Don't hurt her. You can have me instead. I won't fight you. Just let her go. You don't need to hurt anyone." Izuku shrank in on himself as the ramifications of what he'd offered sank in. He didn't want to die, not really. But he wanted someone else to die for his mistakes even less. And well, wasn't this what a hero would do? Not that he could ever be one. The sludge villain scrutinized Izuku, and Izuku did his best to meet his gaze head-on, despite the tears steadily rolling down his cheeks. He wanted the villain to know he'd meant it. The villain seemed to reach the same conclusion, because his creepy smile spread even wider. He chuckled. "Oh, this is going to be good. I haven't had a willing meat suit in over a decade." A slimy tendril plucked Izuku from the garbage pile by his waist and brought him to hover in front of the villain's face. "You'd better remember your word, brat. You struggle, and I might just decide to offer civilian or two for funsies." Izuku swallowed before saying barely above a whisper, "I understand." The sludge villain's eyes narrowed as he smirked. "Good. Now, to take care of the witness." Izuku didn't have time to protest before the woman was flung against the wall, much the same as he'd been moments before. Sludge covered Izuku's mouth to silence his scream. More wrapped around his arms and legs, restricting his movement. "Don't be so dramatic. I just knocked her out. See, she's still breathing." She was, in fact, still breathing, which made Izuku relax marginally. The villain rifling through his pockets until he found Izuku's phone and tossing it and his backpack into the trash was slightly less reassuring. With the matters of witnesses and potential tracking devices settled, the sludge villain carried Izuku deeper into the maze of alleyways with surprising speed. "Now, here's how this is gonna go, kid," the villain said, drawing Izuku's attention again. "I'm going to keep your airway open as long as possible, and you're going to keep taking deep breaths through your nose the whole time. Focus on that and not struggling, and this'll be over nice and quick." Izuku tilted his head in confusion. What was the point of keeping his airway open if the guy was going to kill him anyway? With his mouth covered, he couldn't really ask. So, he just nodded. At least the villain didn't seem intent on gloating or drawing out his suffering. "Open wide." Izuku reluctantly complied, gagging on the taste of sewage that rolled over his tongue for the second time in an hour. It was somehow worse this time. The sludge slithered down his throat, and Izuku's body tried to expel the nauseating stuff. A few unsuccessful heaves left Izuku tired and shaking as he dragged air into his lungs through his nose. The sludge villain laughed and said something about things not being so bad once you got past the GG reflex, but Izuku tuned him out and tried very hard to tune out the feeling of the steadily increasing volume of sludge forcing its way into him. His throat and stomach had been on fire at first, but they were settling into an odd, burning numbness now. That sensation was spreading too. Nope, Izuku was not thinking about that. He wasn't starting to hyperventilate either. The villain wanted him to take deep breaths, and Izuku didn't want to test how much it took to make the guy angry. What was that breathing exercise he'd seen online again? Izuku clamped his teary eyes shut and counted seconds and breaths, quickly losing track of time. It couldn't have been too long. The villain had said it only took 45 seconds the first time. How could so little time feel like forever? As soon as he'd formed the thought, the villain said something, but Izuku couldn't make out the words. It sounded like he was underwater, and everything was miles away. It felt like he was underwater too, with pressure bearing down on him from all sides. Dizziness and darkness played at the edges of his mind. He finally slipped under when something cut off his air. If you're hearing audio of this or seeing it reposted somewhere other than archive of our own, I did not consent to it, and this person is stealing. Please report them. You can find the original work on AO3 under the title Residual Hope. Awareness crept back to him like a brush fire, in painful starts and jumps. His everything hurt. He didn't know that was possible, and he wished he still didn't. Quirks, even breathing and his heartbeat hurt. And movement. Why was he moving? He whined, or at least, tried to. "Oh, there you are, Midoriya. Took you a while." I was starting to wonder if I'd lost my touch. What? What's happening? He slurred. Oh, right. He'd hit his head earlier, hadn't he? He didn't think to wonder how whoever this was knew his name. Don't worry. The pain's just your body trying to kill me, and my body trying to kill you. Immune response is a beach. Things'll settle out in another few hours. Hours? I feel awful. If you're just going to whine, take a nap, the voice said, sounding miffed. Not like you'll miss much. Something shifted, and Izuku felt pressure on his mind? It was weird whatever it was, and he pushed back against it. No struggling. Or did you already forget our deal, kid? Izuku froze, recalling struggling was bad but not what specific context this person was talking about. Fighting back against the kids at school never went well, he got hurt more when he fought back. Several examples from the past semester played out in his mind. It made sense that it was the same here. After a few moments' deliberation, he stopped resisting. The pressure returned, almost hesitantly, and Izuku slipped back into the dark. The next time he woke up, thinking was easier, and he didn't feel so much like he'd been on the receiving end of one of Kaken's beatdowns. Everything still ached, and he felt weak and kinda sick, but he was still standing. Wait, Izuku realized that his eyes were open. How had he forgotten that? When did that happen? Why was he standing in a train station? And why was it dark? Welcome back. Again. This time memories rushed back to go with the voice. Sludge. Izuku got the distinct impression of a cringe. Yeah, never call me that again. Why does everyone assume it's sludge? It's slime. There's a difference, the villain groused. Izuku made a mental note of that for later, because apparently there was a later now. Izuku ran through a series of small, attempted movements, but his body didn't respond in the slightest, instead stepping forward after an overhead announcement for an arriving train. He was definitely not in control of his body right now, and he didn't recognize the name of the station they were at. Okay, he needed to focus on something else. Not that I'm complaining, but why aren't I dead? Okay, this topic wasn't much better, but he was curious. Izuku heard a sigh and jolted to attention when he realized his body hadn't sighed with it. Did that mean they were communicating mind to mind? Part of him had so many questions. Another part of him felt queasy at the thought of part of the slime. Villain's sewage-flavored body being inside his skull and somehow attached to his brain. You're alive, because you kept your side of the deal. Most meat suits tend to waste their oxygen by pointlessly struggling. Also, it's really hard to keep all of my body out of a person's lungs when they won't stop moving and trying to scream during the process, the villain said dismissively. After a while you kinda give up trying. Izuku shuddered at the villain's callousness, surprised when his body responded to that of all things. So, the villain's control wasn't absolute after all. Maybe he could. I'm gonna stop right there, Midoriya. You really want to start struggling with all these helpless civilians around. The villain trailed Izuku's eyes over the crowded train car, lingering on the particularly vulnerable ones, a little girl and her grandma, a woman with a newborn, a gentleman with his arm in a cast. Any plans of fighting back died instantly. Izuku'd already gotten that one woman hurt by distracting All Might and letting the slime villain escape earlier. He didn't want anyone else to get hurt. So, what now? And how do you know my name? You had your school ID and train pass in your wallet. As for what you're going to do? You're going to sit back and relax. I'm getting as far away from Musutafu as possible in 24 hours. Why 24 hours? Izuku asked, almost dreading the answer. The slime villain rolled Izuku's eyes. You always this chatty? Cause 24 is as long as I've ever held a willing possession. Granted that was when I was about your age. Maybe my time limit's longer now, but I don't want to chance it. Izuku didn't want to contemplate what might happen at the end of that time. So, he distracted himself like he always did, quirk analysis. He reviewed Mount Lady's debut from that morning and Kamu Woods. He thought about All Might's quirk which seemed stranger and stranger each time he thought about it. Then he thought about the slime villain's quirk. It was so weird that he'd figured out how to possess people when it looked like he had a simple mutation quirk. Maybe his physical appearance wasn't his quirk after all? If it was a vestigial mutation and the possession itself was his quirk, that made slightly more sense. Quirks like that tended to come with some degree of instinctive knowledge on how to properly use them. Taking over someone's entire body without hurting them, and sure, Izuku ached a bit, but he wasn't hurt, per se, seemed like it would be pretty complicated to do, not something a person was likely to figure out on their own. Of course, Izuku could be discounting how intelligent the villain was. Maybe he was in med school before he went villain and just knew that much about anatomy and physiology. Then again, the guy did say he'd pulled off willing possessions when he was Izuku's age and presumably younger. So, Izuku was leaning more toward the instinctive knowledge theory. Maybe with some additional research to boost his efficiency. Then there was the mental communication component, and if his hazy memory was accurate, some degree of immune modulation to allow their bodies to mesh without suffering a catastrophic immune response. But how had the villain been able to fit? Izuku was jostled from his train of thought by a mental nudge. Geez, kid. Your brain never stops, does it? It was more an observation than a question. Sorry. Did you hear all of that? Nah, just the really loud bits. Unless you're thinking of me, I don't hear your thoughts word for word. Izuku took his return to the present to register what his body was seeing again, a little disconcerted by how easy it was to completely block out the stimuli when he wasn't in control. They were off the train now, walking down an unfamiliar street. This town seemed a lot smaller than Musutafu, judging by the lack of high rises, and it was a little after sunrise. He grew uneasy, thinking about what the villain intended to do with him. Was he finally going to kill him? Dump his body somewhere no one would ever find it? His mom would never get closure if that happened. Oh no! His mom. She must be worried sick by now. His body chuckled before giving a wet cough. Wow, you can work yourself up quick. I told you to relax, and I meant it. You kept your end of the deal, I'm keeping mine. Even if you don't seem to include yourself in "don't hurt anyone." Izuku wasn't really sure how to respond to that. He distantly heard grumbling, maybe an overheard thought like the villain had mentioned. I might be a monster, but even I'm not going to kick a dog when it's down. Izuku wondered if he should be offended by that. Then there was a much clearer sigh in his brain. I'll make sure to leave you somewhere you'll be found and given medical attention. Until then, I need you to sleep again. Can't have you overhearing where I plan on going, now can I? So, Izuku had overheard one of the villain's thoughts just then. Why hadn't he overheard anything else? Was he too distracted by his analysis earlier, or was the villain better at shielding his thoughts due to experience? Maybe the strain of keeping his possession up so long wore at his mental barriers? Izuku had to have been taken at least 16 hours ago if the sun was already up. Izuku felt a steady push at his mind, and his anxiety spiked. He didn't fight it, but he did wonder if he'd really wake up this time as he went under. Surprisingly, Izuku did wake up again. This time he felt fuzzy and light. It took him longer than he liked to register the oxygen mask on his face and the 4-line in the back of his hand. Those were fine. He was significantly less fine with the other catheter once he realized it was there. He fumbled for the button to call a nurse, wondering how long he'd been out. A flurry of activity followed. Apparently, he hadn't been out too long. It was still the same day as before, but late evening now. He'd been found in a small town's alley and transported to the larger hospital in Nagasaki when paramedics heard fluid in his lungs. The doctor told him he had pneumonia, but without even a hint of infection, just the inflammation and fluid. Everyone was confused about that. Between the diuretics, narcotics, and supplemental oxygen, Izuku was breathing pretty easily now, and the doctor estimated he'd be released in a day or two once the inflammation had subsided. There was one other weird thing that showed up when they ran his blood work. There were droplets of slime in his blood. Izuku explained that was probably a side effect of his possession. The doctors didn't seem terribly reassured to hear it and ran a lot more tests after he told them. The next morning, Izuku's mom and a police detective arrived to see him. Izuku was off oxygen, and his morphine dose had been lowered to almost nothing by that point. So, he felt pretty coherent when he greeted them. Mom. Izuku. His mom was in tears before she launched herself forward to hug him. "Oh honey, I was so worried when you didn't come home. And then the police found your phone, and that woman said a villain took you. I thought." Izuku's eyes started watering sympathetically as he hugged his mom and let some of the fear of the prior day sink in. Moments later he was crying too. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm okay, I promise." He didn't mention how he'd expected to die several times over. It didn't happen, so it didn't matter. No need to stress his mom out over could have beens. The detective let them hug it out for several minutes before coughing into his hand. Mother and son pulled apart and wiped their eyes as the man introduced himself. "Hello, Izuku. I'm Tsukochi Naomasa. I'm the detective in charge of the Sludge villain case. Is it all right if I get your statement now, or would you prefer if we scheduled an appointment for when you're back in Musutafu?" Izuku's eyes widened, and he waved his arms. "No, now's fine. I don't want you to have come all this way for nothing." The man chuckled, and Izuku noted it was a softer thing than the slime villains. "It wouldn't be for nothing. I still had to make the trip for your medical file and to take the statement of the man who found you." Izuku didn't think giving himself time to overthink an interview was a good idea. He might as well get it over with now. Plus, the narcotics might have still been dampening his anxiety a touch. Izuku glanced at his mom and chewed his lower lip. He didn't want her to hear this. He just knew it would make her cry again. "Mom, why don't you go check in with the doctor? They had a few questions about family medical history I didn't know the answers to. I'll be fine." Inko was still teary-eyed, and Izuku tried to put on his best reassuring smile for her. It came out a bit watery, but his mom smiled back and nodded. She dug around in her purse for a minute before pulling his phone out to hand to him. "I'll be back soon. Call if you need me before then." "Always." With one final glance over her shoulder, Izuku's mom left the room. Once the door clicked shut, Izuku sighed and slumped back against his propped-up bed. "Where do you want me to start?" he asked Tsukochi. "When you encountered the Sludge villain in the underpass. I already spoke to All Might and got his side of events there and on the rooftop. He actually requested I take this case when he found out you'd been taken by the villain. We're old friends." "Oh. Well, that saved Izuku trying to leave out anything for the hero's sake. He wondered if he should feel touched that the number one hero had specifically asked someone to look into his disappearance. Was All Might worried? It made a little sense. The hero had been the last person aside from the woman Izuku'd saved to see him before he'd vanished. Izuku hoped All Might didn't feel at all responsible. He took a fortifying breath and told his tale, occasionally pausing for the detective to ask a clarifying question. 30 minutes later the man had everything he needed and headed off to speak to the doctor in charge of Izuku's case. Izuku napped until his mom and the doctor returned. Then he got to hear the final results of all the testing they'd run the night before. They estimated there to be 1/4 of a liter of slime still inside him, but it seemed inert and wasn't causing any immediate problems that they could identify. His immune system wasn't attacking it or recognizing it as a threat, which was the main concern. When they described the type of systemic reaction that could cause and symptoms to watch for, Izuku thought of how awful he'd felt the first time he woke up after being taken and shuddered. They theorized that the villain's quirk had somehow convinced his body that the slime was self to keep his immune system from targeting it. Hopefully, that particular effect would linger until Izuku's body could process the leftover slime on its own and eliminate it over the next few months. They did want him to keep an eye out for any reaction symptoms just in case. They also set him up to see a doctor in Musutafu every month to monitor the amount of slime in his blood to make sure his body didn't run into any problems breaking it down. Aside from that, every other scan and test had come back normal or better than normal for a person in his age group. Izuku decided not to mention the faint stretch marks he discovered scattered across his body when changing that morning. They blended in with his other scars anyway. He also didn't mention how the burn Kaken had given him the day he went missing already looked a week old, and several of his bruises and older injuries had faded or disappeared completely. He'd recovered from pneumonia abnormally fast too. With the fluid out of his lungs, the inflammation was now non-existent. The doctor set him up for discharge right after lunch and gave him a script for a short course of medication to take at home, but Izuku felt fine. He surreptitiously asked the nurse removing his foreline if any healing quirks had been used on him during his stay. There hadn't been any. He set that mystery aside for later contemplation as he focused on getting back to his life, or what was left of it, with his dream thoroughly shot down. Maybe he'd do some research on quirk analysis or hero support? Either way, he'd miss 2 days of school. Thankfully, with his case and the string of cases attributed to the Sludge villain, a murder every month or two for the last year with no survivors prior to Izuku being blasted all over the news, his teachers couldn't deny his late work when he turned it in. As for his classmates, his unfortunate celebrity status just meant they had more fuel to use when describing how weak and useless he was. Kaken was oddly silent about the whole thing aside from one comment of "good job not dying, nerd." Izuku thought that meant he'd been concerned? He was 85% sure, but he wasn't going to ask for clarification. If you're hearing audio of this or seeing it reposted somewhere other than Archive of Our Own, I did not consent to it, and this person is stealing. Please report them. You can find the original work on AO3 under the title Residual Hope. It took all of 1 week for the physical bullying to pick back up, though Kaken rarely got involved anymore unless Izuku bumped into him. His lackeys were more than willing to pick up his slack. By the 3rd week, Izuku was already forgetting what it felt like to be pain-free. Granted, his injuries were healing quicker than usual. While walking home from school, Izuku turned his hand over, examining the nasty purple bruise from a classmate stepping on his hand while he picked up his bullet-scattered notes yesterday. It was already faintly lightening, and it hadn't spread as far as he'd expected. He sighed and shoved his hand in his pocket. That one had been annoying to hide from his mom. Izuku froze as he heard a familiar rough voice approaching. He glanced around the corner he'd been about to walk past and tensed as he spotted Kaken and his usual group. Izuku did not want to get a second beating today, thank you very much. The one at lunch had been plenty. So, he beat a hasty retreat and decided to take a different path home. Since he didn't really feel like going through the underpass ever again, he took a circuitous route that should keep him out of Kaken's way until the blonde was already home and his minions dispersed. If it happened to pass the park Kaken and Izuku used to play in as kids, that was neither here nor there. Izuku wandered into the more wooded part of the park on a whim, hoping to keep out of sight if anyone else from his school walked by. He meandered for a while before he felt a faint tugging sensation. He frowned and looked around. There was a smaller, overgrown trail that split off here. If Izuku remembered right, it led to an old pond. No one went there anymore because of the smell. The plumbing to that pond had been broken for years, and the city kept putting off fixing it. So, it had stagnated and the water had grown particularly gross. It was lonely and forgotten. Izuku felt that tug again and huffed. Seemed like an appropriate enough place for him. He ducked under a low-hanging tree branch and followed the old trail. The pond was just as disgusting as he remembered from the times he and Kaken dared each other to touch the scummy water when they were younger. The willow tree that broke the plumbing seemed to be thriving though. He sat down underneath the tree and watched the last of the year's dragonflies chase smaller insects above the pond's surface. He didn't even notice he had company until a slimy tendril wrapped around the lower half of his face, cutting off his yelp of surprise. Izuku whipped around and climbed to his feet to find himself face to face with the slime villain again. He was a slightly lighter shade of green this time, and he smelled more like stagnant pond than sewage. The rest was still the same. The villain, for his part, didn't restrain Izuku further but didn't remove the tendril from Izuku's face as they stared at each other. Finally, Izuku broke the staring contest by raising an eyebrow and humming questioningly, careful to keep his mouth shut. The villain seemed to shake off whatever he'd been thinking about and grinned. "Hey, Midoriya. Fancy meeting you here. I've actually been looking for you. Now, I'm going to uncover your face. Don't scream, or things might get messy." The villain glanced off in the direction of the playground and field where they could still hear people playing. Izuku bristled at the implied threat before nodding slowly. The villain unwrapped the slimy tendril from his face and retracted it. Izuku felt that odd tugging sensation again and paled as he realized it was the slime left in his body likely responding to his proximity to the villain. Izuku cleared his throat, reminding himself that it was clear and not clogged by the villain. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. The villain kept shifting his form in short, twitchy movements as he looked around to reassure himself that they were alone before answering. I have a proposition for you, but first, how'd you enjoy the gift? Izuku wasn't sure he liked where this was going, but he bit. What gift? The little bits of slime still circulating in your blood. Surely you haven't gotten injured enough to use it all up this soon. Izuku blinked, processing that for a moment and connecting several dots. His eyes widened. That's what's speeding up my healing. The slime villain smiled and nodded. It's also real good for preventing infections. With my body being constantly exposed to the air and ground, I've got a pretty killer immune system. Well, now the pneumonia without any infection made more sense, sorta. Why'd I get pneumonia then? I thought you stayed out of my lungs. The second time. The first time I tried to steal your body, I didn't really intend to keep you alive. There was still a bit of slime in your lungs by the second time. I reabsorbed it, but your lungs were already pretty irritated. Did you run off before paramedics looked you over or something? The villain asked, sounding angry. Izuku looked down at his shoes and hunched his shoulders. Something like that. The villain grumbled and did one of his twitchy shifts again, reminding Izuku oddly of some of the people he'd seen hanging out around the shadier parts of town. Izuku wondered if maybe the man was on something and having withdrawal. Before he could think more on the topic, the villain pinned him with a look. Izuku wasn't quite sure what it meant, but he froze under it. Look, kid. I came back here to ask you if you'd let me possess you again. Izuku balked at the idea, taking a step back before stopping himself. The villain looked the smallest bit panicked at his aborted retreat. Izuku narrowed his eyes and frowned. When he didn't make any further move to leave, the villain started again. I haven't had a willing meat suit, host? Partner? In a long time. I forgot how nice it felt to not kill someone to use my quirk, and... The guy kept talking, but Izuku's mind was rapidly piecing together details he'd rather it didn't. The villain wasn't on drags. He had quirk withdrawal. He'd heard about that in his school's health class. He wasn't entirely sure if it was as common and horrible as his teachers made it seem, and used it to excuse his classmates firing off their quirks in class and at Izuku, but this villain did seem to be displaying several of the symptoms. Jitteriness, decreased focus, fixation on and/or craving the thing needed to use their quirk if a material was needed. The time frame here fit his prior murders too. DMN it, Izuku was actually considering this. The guy even sought Izuku out rather than grabbing some random civilian. He didn't want to kill anyone, did he? Izuku really looked at the man in front of him and couldn't shake the feeling he was asking for help. And Izuku never could turn away from someone who needed help. Izuku's shoulders half relaxed, half slumped as he took his backpack off and dropped it to the ground beside him. The villain stopped talking and shot him a questioning look. What changed a year ago? The slime villain balked this time before looking off to the side. Was he ashamed? One of my old pals invited me to a party. Someone there spiked the punch with some bad trigger. Don't do drags, kid. He pointedly ignored Izuku's snort. That stuff messed up my quirk. The urge to use it has been much worse since then. I start feeling not right when I go too long. Izuku stared at the man a bit longer before he rolled his head back to look at the sky. He couldn't believe he was doing this. No killing or hurting anyone except self-defense, of course, and no committing crimes in my body. No completely blocking me out or putting me to sleep unless it's a life and death situation or I give explicit consent. And you have to let me be myself around family and school. They'll notice if I suddenly start acting weird. The slime villain's eyes widened comically and Izuku had questions about how that worked before rapidly nodding. Done. We'll figure out more details later. When the villain's not in obvious withdrawal, and when they couldn't be so easily overheard. The guy was still a wanted criminal. If someone heard them and called the police, things were likely to get violent. Izuku wasn't about to let that happen when it could be so easily avoided. I'm expected home in an hour. Is this going to knock me out again? Izuku asked tiredly. Nope. Shouldn't as long as you don't have a panic attack like the last go-around. So, the villain edged closer but didn't touch him yet. Izuku appreciated the one last chance to back out but ignored it, taking a step forward. Do it! He left his mouth open afterward and closed his eyes tight. Some of the villain wrapped around him as a tendril entered his mouth. The taste wasn't as bad this time, but Izuku strongly suspected the villain had taken a recent dip in the nasty pond. He still gagged and tried to puke at first, but the slime wrapped around him held him fairly steady until the automatic response passed. He focused on his breathing as he forced himself to relax and loosen his jaw from where he'd tried to clamp it shut. At least, it didn't hurt like last time. It was more pressure than anything, followed by numbness. He also noticed the temperature difference this time. Winter was fast approaching. After all, it made sense for the villain's semi-solid body, which didn't lend itself to wearing a coat, to run colder than a standard human's. Izuku made a mental note to figure out some way for them to avoid giving his body temperature shock for the next time they did this. He was already starting to shiver. Maybe 20 seconds into the process, Izuku's curiosity got the better of his anxiety, and he paid more attention to the spreading numbness in his body. The slime villain had numbed his throat and stomach first, presumably to shut off his GG and vomit reflexes. From there he seemed to be prioritizing reaching his legs and spine, and it took Izuku a moment to connect that to stabilizing him internally as he ran out of slime to do so externally. Once those were fully numbed and under the villain's control, the slime wrapped around the outside of Izuku's body retracted, and the numbness started spreading in a branching pattern that Izuku quickly identified as mirroring his circulatory system. When the numbness hit his heart, he shuddered, but his heart only skipped a single beat before settling back into its rhythm, though maybe pumping a bit harder? Stronger? He made a mental note to ask about that after this was finished. His lungs going numb gave him a similar reaction, and they seemed to expand farther afterward. Weird. About the time 90% of Izuku was numb, the villain spoke up, prompting Izuku to open his eyes. You still with me, kid? Ah, good. This is where things goofed up last time. You need to hold your breath for a little bit at the end. Last time you didn't hear me, and I didn't have control of your lungs yet. I went ahead and got your lungs this time. So, all you have to do is not freak out when you stop breathing for a few seconds, okay? Izuku tried to nod and was surprised when his numbed body allowed the movement. He closed his eyes again after. Standing there and letting it happen was one thing, but actually seeing the slime pouring into his body at an unbelievable rate and volume was another thing. The handful of stretch marks he'd found on his neck made sense now. How much must the villain be able to condense his body for this to even work? As promised, when Izuku's lungs stopped pulling in air, it was only for 15 seconds. Then he was back to breathing again. He vaguely felt several somethings travel down his throat and figured that was probably the solid bits of the villain. Yeah, that was going in the pile of things not to think about ever again. The numbness finished spreading through him a few seconds later, and his brain went hazy for a split second. Then he could think clearly again, and the villain was talking in his head. All right, kid. Where to? Should I drive, or do you want to? I will. You don't know the way to my apartment, Izuku said mentally. He tentatively took a step backward to pick up his backpack. He found he could move through the receding numbness now, rather than the complete and total disconnect of last time. What was left behind was like an extra layer of sensation over top of what he normally felt. It was a little distracting being able to fully experience the pressure of condensed slime spread evenly throughout his body. He shakily took his jacket out of his backpack and pulled it on, zipping it all the way up. That went a long way to assure himself that he had the hang of moving in this state. As he started the walk home, he decided to keep up the conversation. He hadn't often had someone to talk to on his walks, let alone someone non-antagonistic. You sound more stable. Feeling better? Izuku asked. Izuku felt a faint impression of surprise, which he guessed was coming from his passenger. Yeah, actually. A bit more clear-headed. I hear quirk withdrawal is a beach. The villain's laugh rattled around inside his skull, making Izuku blink a few times. Wait, had he not blinked the entire block they just walked? That thought was apparently loud enough to hear, as it set the villain to cackling again. Nope. There's a thin layer of slime over your eyes, so I blocked that reflex. I'm used to not blinking. Here. Useful. Probably shouldn't do that when we're in a confined space around other people. It'll look weird if someone notices we never blink. I'm fine with you doing that in private or on a walk like this though. Izuku took advantage of not needing to blink to look around at everything as they walked, giving mental commentary on the area as he effectively took the slime villain on a tour of his route home, also explaining that it was one of many. That have to do with avoiding your bullies? The villain asked, controlling Izuku's right hand to bring it up for them to look at the bruise there. The villain controlling his arm didn't even feel different from Izuku's own movements really. The only thing was that the compressed slime moved a fraction of a second before Izuku's muscles rather than the other way around. Izuku flexed his bruised hand and abruptly realized that the villain was keeping all of his injuries numbed, though the feeling had returned to the rest of him. Gratitude rose unbidden, and he grinned. Then he thought about the question. He contemplated lying but figured the villain would see through him by the pattern of his injuries. He physically sighed. Yeah. After a few moments of silence, Izuku asked, "What's your name? I can't keep calling you slime villain forever." For a minute Izuku didn't think the villain was going to answer. Ikikyo. Izuku had the feeling that was a given name rather than a surname, but he didn't blame the guy. He got the whole not trusting thing. He still smiled inside and out as he said, "Hello, Ikikyo. It's nice to meet you, I'm in your care." The slime villain Ikikyo huffed a single laugh with Izuku's body. "Nice to formally meet you, Midoriya Izuku. And likewise." They talked some more on the way to Izuku's home, just general getting to know each other stuff. Like Ikikyo being 25 and having some experience as a plumber and locksmith. Izuku was sure that was totally legal and had nothing to do with avoiding the police and getting into places he shouldn't. In turn, Izuku told Ikikyo about his recently dead dream of being a hero and his quirk analysis hobby. "I could see you getting into that for a living. I didn't catch all of what you said about my quirk, but you are right about it being possession instead of my physical appearance. Unintentionally lied on the registry paperwork as a kid and never updated it when I figured out the rest. I get enough funny looks as is. Can you imagine the response if my papers said body possession on them?" Izuku flinched in sympathy as he climbed the stairs to his apartment. "Believe me, I wish I could take quirkless off of mine. I'll be lucky if I can get into any high school with that." He paused on the landing of the floor below his as it suddenly dawned on him that he was showing a known villain where he and his mother lived. New rule, never endanger mom or make her sad. Also, if anyone ever breaks in, you have full permission to use whatever force is necessary to protect her and me, he added after practically feeling Ikikyo's judgmental stare. Izuku got the impression of a nod of approval before Ikikyo mentally agreed, "Fine. In exchange, you don't rat me out to police or heroes whether I'm here or not." Agreed. That shouldn't be too. Oh no, Izuku was fine. Keeping one more secret if it saved lives, except there was one teensy tiny problem he'd forgotten about until just now. What? What's wrong? Izuku felt the villain within him tense as if expecting to face a threat. He was touched for a moment before he went back to panicking. "I forgot my doctor appointment next week. They're going to draw blood to see how the slime breakdown is going. If I show up with more or the same amount, they'll know something's up. Can you take all of your slime with you when you exit?" Ikikyo mentally frowned. "No. It's kinda like backwash in a glass of water. Once that's in there, there's no getting all of it out, even if you tried." Izuku made a face of disgust at the analogy. "I get the picture. I might have a workaround though." "I'm listening. If I'm with you when you go for your doctor appointment, I can temporarily block extra flow to that vein and pull all slime out of the stagnant blood. As long as they don't take a huge sample, that should make it look like just you in here." Izuku felt a poke at the inside of his ribs and squeaked. "Don't do that," he hissed out loud before slapping a hand over his mouth and looking around. "Okay, if I start to answer you out loud in public and you catch it, you have full permission to shut me up." Izuku's jaw suddenly locked shut before loosening again. "Got it." Izuku nodded and dug his key out of his pocket. "Mom, I'm home," he called as he slipped off his shoes and hung his jacket. Then he wandered toward the kitchen, careful to keep his injured right hand out of sight. He could smell katsudon cooking. He started drooling, but it felt a touch too thick to be normal, and he winced as he swallowed it. Swallowing felt a little off too. He raised a hand to touch his neck as he wondered if his throat was permanently stretched out. "Hi, sweetie. Food's almost done. Why don't you go change then help me set the table?" "Sure," he said, already heading down the hall, still massaging the spots along his neck with stretch marks. Once they were out of sight of the kitchen, Akikyo answered his unvoiced question, "It's already shrinking back down. I can go slower next time to stretch it less. I admit I was a little overeager earlier. As for the rest of your body, can't do much about that. As you grow or put on more muscle, we'll have more room to work with. Actually, you working out would be a good cover for the next thing I need to tell you." Izuku nodded as he stepped into his room. "Go ahead." When all he got was shocked silence, Izuku actually looked at his room before blushing. "Oh, right. Know anyone who collects All Might merch? I was actually thinking of selling most of this. And don't look while I change." That seemed to snap Akikyo out of it. "Nothing I don't already know about, but sure, kid. I won't look out of your eyes until you give the all clear. As for the merch, I'll ask around. Get me a set of prices later, and I'll figure out a commission for acting as an intermediary. I wouldn't trust most of my contacts with meeting you in person." "Sure." Why the sudden dislike for heroes? Or is it All Might in particular? "Just All Might. He kinda crushed my dream after rescuing me from you, then he left me on top of a roof." Izuku made a confused noise in the back of his throat when his body seized up. "Akikyo!" Then he felt it. Anger radiated off his passenger. Izuku tried to shrink in on himself as his fear rose in response. All the angry, disappointed, disgusted looks he got from teachers and classmates were too fresh in his mind after his day at school. He physically flinched when Akikyo sighed. "Izuku, I'm not mad at you, but I saw the way you kept looking at rooftops on the walk here." "Shoot," Izuku hadn't even noticed. Kaken's suicide bait echoed tauntingly in his ears. Akikyo made a choked sound before asking, "Are you suicidal?" I don't know. I don't really want to die but you thought nothing of offering yourself up in exchange for that lady or letting a known murderer hang out in your body." Akikyo's emotions were fluctuating, but he tamped down on them or blocked them before any bled through enough to identify. He finally seemed to remember his stranglehold on Izuku's motor skills too and released him. "New rule, you keep yourself alive whether I'm here or not. You've got a good mind and a better heart. Loads of people would miss out if you offed yourself. I'd miss you too, I guess." Izuku covered his mouth as tears welled in his eyes. "Thanks, you wanted to tell me something," he asked to distract from his emotional moment. "Yeah, kid," Akikyo said, awkwardly attempting to give him an internal hug. "It sorta worked?" Izuku got what he meant anyway. "When we're like this, you'll need to eat more. While I'm not as active, I am using my quirk to keep this whole thing working." Izuku felt the slime throughout his body shift, making him want to squirm until it settled back into place. "If I remember right, it usually works out to about 1.5 times what the host usually eats, give or take. In your case, it might be closer to double. Are you sure you're even eating enough for you, Midoriya? You're kinda scrawny." Hee. Izuku blushed and pouted as he turned to grab a shirt from his closet. He paused when he caught sight of himself in the mirror. Yeah, he had a few scars and was shrimpy. Yes, with Akikyo present he could tell his body had gained weight. He didn't really care about those. What he did get stuck on was the fact his blush was closer to black than red. "Akikyo! What? What's going?" Izuku's eyes twitched without his say-so, and Izuku realized his friend had been keeping his word and not looking that whole time. "Oh. Yeah, that might be a problem. Want me to turn off blushing? I can probably do that. Here, let me try something." Izuku resisted the urge to squirm again as the slime in his face shifted and flowed through and around the muscles and connective tissue there. Wow, that felt weird. If he looked really close in the mirror he could kinda see the movement under his skin too. He shuddered, but Akikyo kept Izuku from closing their eyes or moving away while he focused on fixing the problem. After a few more seconds, the villain figured something out and gave a triumphant cheer as the unnatural color faded from their cheeks. "Eh," Izuku said out loud while rubbing his cheeks. Nothing felt different now that the slime had stopped moving. "Is that going to impact my circulation any?" "Probably not. I'll keep a feel on it just in case." "Never done that before." Izuku's body shrugged, and Izuku turned back to his closet. He didn't really care if Akikyo was watching now. He'd already gotten his pants changed out. As he contemplated his shirts, he rubbed his hands together, feeling that they were still cold, though his shivering had settled out not long before they'd gotten home. He grabbed a thick sweatshirt. "I should probably shower after dinner to finish warming up," he muttered mostly to himself. Minor body horror behind them, Izuku headed for dinner. "Anything else you need while you're in here that I need to know about?" Izuku asked, tapping a finger against his sternum. Let's see. Oh. If your lungs feel a little off, that's because I'm making them stretch more. I need oxygen too. Again, roughly 1.5 times your usual amount to keep both of us running smoothly, but there's only so much room in your chest. Might not want to exercise too much while I'm visiting. You'll get short of breath faster than when I'm gone. Guess I'll take those as rest days?" Izuku said, a bit confused to find he'd already decided to follow Akikyo's suggestion of working out. He really could stand to get in shape. How had he ever thought he stood a chance of getting into a hero course with his body looking like this? Akikyo shot him a feeling of disapproval and jerked his eyes up and away from his lacking form. "You were going to set the table?" "Oh, right." Dinner was great, though Akikyo almost gave him a heart attack when he took over for a moment to have him swallow a piece of pork whole, then reached a tendril of slime up his throat to grab it and ease it the rest of the way down. It was half digested before it even reached their stomach. At least, Akikyo remembered to turn their blink reflex back on before Mom sat down to eat with them. After explaining his new workout plans, she happily got him some leftovers from the fridge to supplement the katsudon. She promised to start making him bigger portions too. One awkward shower, with Akikyo tuning out again. Later Izuku was warm and ready for bed. He'd finished his homework at school, thankfully. He was already exhausted, and he wasn't quite sure why. Probably all the work going into speed healing your injuries. That energy has to come from somewhere, and it's not me who's hurt. Oh, that made sense. Izuku yawned. "Aren't you going to get bored while I sleep?" "Nah, I'll get some shut-eye too." "You have any idea how uncomfortable and cold sleeping in a plugged bathtub is? My form falls apart when I sleep, so being in a body is the only way I can sleep in a bed without making a mess and puddling out onto the floor." Izuku shivered at the impression of trying to sleep on cold porcelain he got from the guy and pulled his blankets around him tighter. "Good night, Akikyo." "Good night, Midoriya." The next morning wasn't all that interesting, except Izuku let Akikyo control their body on the way to school. He felt a little bad that the man was stuck without much time to do anything where he could be present this visit. Don't sweat it, kid. After your doctor appointment, I'll try to swing by mostly on weekends. That'll give us more free time and a chance to test my time limit some too. I didn't feel all that strained at 24 hours last time. Speaking of, are you cool with me swinging by the afternoon before your appointment? What day was it? Tuesday, and yeah, Monday afternoon is fine. Want me to meet you at the park again? I could feel when I got close to you. The slime you left behind still responded to your control and tugged me in your direction when I got close enough. Wait, really? That never happened before. Here. Wonder if that's the trigger or just general quirk growth. Guess there's no real way of knowing at this point, though it is convenient. Yeah. Anyway, sure. I'll catch you at the park. We can separate there today too after your class is let out. I'll try going slower then and see how much time it takes. Izuku grinned in the back of their mind. And swing by before you get withdrawal that bad next time. You don't want to accidentally hurt someone or me if you're desperate. When they reached the school gate, they swapped out control, almost seamlessly. Izuku only tripped once. By the time Izuku reached the classroom, he knew it was going to be a bad day. It always was when it started with spider lilies and slurs written on his desk. Akikyo was worryingly silent as Izuku cleaned the surface, ignoring the snickers around the room. Classes themselves weren't too bad, but there was a steadily building sense of impending doom as lunch approached. Izuku was packing 10 minutes before the bell even rang, and Akikyo tensed alongside his muscles. As soon as the bell rings, we run, take a left outside the door, right at the end of the corridor, another left, go down the stairs to the second floor, run to the other stairwell, circle back up to this floor, and camp out in the janitor closet by the staircase. If we can make it there, we should be safe. Watch out for the guy with extendable fingers. Izuku glanced at the boy with extendable digits. And everyone in the front row. They like to trip me. If we trip, we're done for. And whatever happens, we cannot bump into Kaken, Izuku added, shooting Kaken a glance. He'll do worse than any of the others, but he's mostly been leaving me alone since my abduction. Akikyo didn't seem happy, but he tried to soothe the anxiety rolling off of Izuku in waves. He did take partial control of Izuku's body when he started to tremble though, suppressing the stress reaction. Visible weakness might as well be blood in the water to those types. Then he turned Izuku's eyes back on Kaken's lackey with the finger quirk. What's the breakdown on his quirk, Midoriya? Do those fingers actually stretch or do they grow? Does the bone maintain density or get weaker with extra length? Izuku blinked and thought for a moment, recalling his classmates' pages in his fourth notebook. They grow and shrink. He has to get a lot of dietary calcium and phosphorus and sometimes take supplements, so I'm betting the bones weaken with extra length. Length and/or bone integrity might be dependent on how much calcium and phosphorus he has available. Maximum known length is 4 meters. He has the same grip strength regardless of finger length, and it's decently strong. Akikyo hummed, looking between the boy and the front of the room, gauging the distance. Then he asked about those in the front row. Izuku happily listed off everything he knew about them to take his mind off of his probable impending beating. When he finished the last one, his bodymate gave him an impression of a head pat. If one of them catches us, let me handle it. Izuku mentally stared at his companion, both bewildered and a little terrified. What are you going to do? Akikyo drew Izuku's mouth into a wide smile that Izuku remembered from the underpass, though it hadn't been on his face then. Based on the few reactions Izuku could see from his classmates, it was just as unsettling for them as him. Oh, don't worry. I won't leave any marks. Let me help you on the way to the door. Akikyo let up on the control he'd taken without permission as if realizing he may have overstepped. Izuku did the equivalent of scooting to the side in his brain, and he felt Akikyo tense and relax a few muscles experimentally as he slid back into the driver's seat. Interestingly, Izuku wasn't completely ousted this time. He stared at his left hand as he clenched and unclenched it around his backpack strap. Akikyo nudged his head back up, and Izuku cooperated as they turned their head back to watch the clock. They were sharing? The second the bell rang, they both pushed off, dashing for the door faster than Izuku remembered being able to move. Akikyo spotted the first outstretched ankle and directed them in a hop over it while Izuku kept an eye out for others. They'd almost made it when a sudden yank on his backpack brought them up short. Fingers got us, Akikyo said, gently shoving Izuku toward the back of their mind. Izuku ceded control willingly, if nervously. He watched and felt as his friend pulled their face into a smile again and turned to look Izuku's classmate in the eye. Mind letting me go? He asked with a too-sweet voice. Fingers missed the warning it was and sneered. Yeah right, loser. You think someone as pathetic and useless as you can ditch us? 2 more classmates stepped up beside the first. One popped his knuckles. Guess we need to remind you how helpless you are. Didn't think you'd forget so quickly after you were body-snatched and gave up your dream. Izuku cowered back, forgetting that he couldn't physically get away. Akikyo felt his reaction and grew angry. Izuku reminded himself over and over that it wasn't aimed at him. It felt a little different from what he got from his classmates when he really focused on it. Seeing the two types side by side like this, Izuku thought Akikyo's anger might be more protective while the others had a heavy dose of disgust or condescension. That difference helped a little, though he was still quaking in his figurative boots. Izuku instinctively stopped watching when Fingers reached for him with his quirk. Then their arm shot out and caught two of the approaching fingers in a crushing grip and twisted. Izuku dared to tune back in when the boy yelped. Akikyo had the bully's fingers bent at a painful angle and was still smiling. The other two kids had taken a step back at the display. Now, you're going to let me go, and you're going to leave me the F alone for the rest of the school year, or I'm going to snap your twig fingers. Then I'll do the fingers on your other hand. Capiche? What? What is wrong with you? I'm done putting up with this school's crap. I've talked to a real villain face to face, been at his mercy, and figured out what he wanted and how to stay alive. You're not that scary. Izuku soaked up every word, watching in awe. Then Akikyo turned their eyes on the left-hand lackey. In 30 seconds, he verbally picked apart how to disable his quirk and hurt him bad enough to put him out of a fight. Then he moved on to the right-hand kid. All with the analysis Izuku had given him minutes before. Somewhere in there, fingers let go of Izuku's bag. Once Akikyo finished his rendition of Izuku's analysis, he gave the boy's digits one last squeeze, just enough to feel the bones creak in their grip, and shoved him away. Oh, and if I'm so weak, useless, and helpless, what does that make you? He smiled sweetly again before unhurriedly striding from the room. If you're hearing audio of this or seeing it reposted somewhere other than archive of our own, I did not consent to it, and this person is stealing. Please report them. You can find the original work on AO3 under the title Residual Hope. Izuku didn't fully come out of his shock at having someone stand up for him, let alone with his own body and analysis, until school was out. He ate his lunch on autopilot and wrote notes without really hearing anything the teachers said. His classmates were shooting him looks the whole time too, and not the usual ones. A sense of unease plagued the last few classes of the day. None of it truly touched Izuku before flowing around and past him until the closing bell rattled something back into place. He blinked and took a deep breath, letting it really sink in that he, technically Akikyo, had stood up to and threatened 3 of his bullies, and he hadn't gotten hurt. He hadn't gotten hurt. Somehow that fact seemed the most fantastical and strange. As Izuku started packing his books away, Akikyo broke his silence to chime in, "There you are. Pretty sure you dissociated or something there for a bit. Couldn't get you to respond at all." "Here? Oh, sorry," Izuku said, still feeling a bit off balance. Why did the lack of pain make this whole thing feel so unreal? That's a question for a therapist, kid, not me. Now, come on. We've stayed here too long already. I'm surprised none of your other bullies tried pressing their luck. Maybe they think I finally snapped. Izuku suggested, half joking. He wondered quietly if maybe he had, back when he agreed to occasionally act as a safe house for a villain. Akikyo made a non-committal sound in their mind and prodded Izuku's body into standing. Izuku obliged and started walking. They reached the park and the stagnant pond a while later, and Izuku laid down under the willow tree, folding his arms behind his head as he stared up at the swaying branches. "So, how does this work? I wasn't awake for it last time." "Basically, the same thing, just backwards," Akikyo said, starting to shift around inside their body. "You still have to hold your breath briefly, but it's at the beginning instead of the end. Ready?" Izuku started a timer on his phone. Then he nodded and relaxed, blowing out a breath before taking a deep one and holding it. That extra sensation of the slime around his lungs tensing, or stiffening, let Izuku know he wouldn't accidentally inhale even if his attention lapsed. Slime and something a bit more solid crept up his throat, and Izuku closed his eyes, thankful that certain reflexes seemed to still be suppressed. It really was like the initial possession but in reverse. And without the numbness covering up the feeling of slime flowing through his body and out of it. Also, the slime didn't taste like much of anything on its way out. It did take longer than possession, though Izuku wasn't sure if that was normal or because Akikyo was trying to be considerate. Regardless, the steady decrease in internal pressure had Izuku sighing in relief. He'd gotten used to the constant pressure, but the difference with it gone was striking. All in all, the depossession process took 2 minutes. Izuku felt a bit lightheaded and weird afterward. This possession he'd had much more awake time to get used to having another person sharing his everything. He'd never thought his head could feel lonely. He was pulled from his thoughts by Akikyo shifting and stretching his once more freed form. Consequently, this tugged on the slime still inside Izuku. The sensation felt stronger than yesterday. Did you purposely leave more behind? Izuku asked as he sat up. HM? Oh, not really? I was kind of focusing on leaving without stretching anything too much. Let me. Izuku lurched forward slightly and slapped a hand to his chest when the slime tugged again. Hey, what do you know? I can feel it too. Kinda distant and muffled, but I'll definitely be able to find you easier next week now that I know what to look for. Great, Izuku mumbled, hoping there weren't going to be any health complications from having even more slime circulating in his body long term. Well, kid, it's been fun, but I have to get going. Can't risk anyone seeing me. Until Monday, Akikyo said, waving a tendril as he slunk off deeper into the park. See you Monday, Izuku called back before standing and walking home. On the way, he thought over the last 24 hours. Was he an idiot for helping Akikyo? Izuku stopped in the middle of the sidewalk as he wondered if All Might would have helped the slime man. Izuku wasn't convinced he would. Arguably, Izuku shouldn't have either. The man was a murderer, though not because he wanted to be. Sticking him in a prison cell away from anyone he could ever use his quirk on for the rest of his life was both the safest and cruelest thing to do. And it was exactly what would have happened if Izuku hadn't been so desperate to ask his stupid question and made All Might drop the bottles. Izuku huffed as he realized the irony. His dream being crushed had unintentionally helped someone. Really, that's what Akikyo needed, help. And those that no one else would stand up for or offer a hand to. Izuku knew what that was like, though he'd never really thought about others being treated that way. He'd never been offered a friendly hand, a Deku didn't deserve one, but maybe being that person to others could become his new dream. Izuku grinned softly as he looked down at his right hand, turning it over. After a day's possession, the bruise had almost completely faded. Then he looked further up his arm. A few of the stretch marks were more pronounced now, and old scars taunted him for his weakness. Izuku focused past those surface marks, eyeing the muscle underneath. He'd been incredibly lucky, being able to save that lady from Akikyo in the alley all those weeks ago and being able to help Akikyo just by being a willing subject for his quirk. As a rule, Izuku was not lucky. He didn't trust it to last, nothing good ever did. Not for him. If he wanted to keep saving and helping people, despite never being a hero, he needed to stack the deck in his favor. The next time Izuku went to the park, he took a tray of hot tea in to-go cups and 2 extra layers of clothing. The temperature had dropped close to freezing over the weekend, and Izuku really didn't feel like getting hypothermia. Akikyo was waiting for him like before. Izuku shoved all but one of the steaming drinks at the slime man before he could say anything. Drink up. I'm not dealing with temperature shock. Akikyo looked between the drinks and Izuku a few times before getting it. 20 minutes and several cups of tea later, Izuku sat on the ground. He figured he'd save Akikyo the trouble of having to stabilize him standing like last time. Izuku set up a timer on his phone again and said, "Ready when you are." "1 sec," Akikyo said, narrowing his eyes in concentration. Izuku tilted his head and frowned. Then he jolted when the slime already in his system started coalescing in the vicinity of his stomach. Izuku's eyes widened when his stomach went numb and that numbness started climbing his throat. He laughed. "You planned this, didn't you?" Akikyo smirked. "Nope. Actually, thought of it yesterday. Should make things a bit quicker. And more pleasant for all involved," Izuku added, relaxing again. With the problematic reflexes already blocked, possession only took a minute and a half. Then Izuku and Akikyo stood up and grabbed the last cup of warm tea, taking long sips until their shivers ceased. Izuku let Akikyo drive on the way to his apartment to test the man's knowledge of the route. They made it back without a hitch, and Akikyo raised a mental eyebrow at Izuku when he saw the set of dumbbells that had replaced the All Might action figures on the bottom shelf of his bookcase. Izuku smiled and said out loud, "Did you know that tearing muscle fibers, like one would in a workout, counts as an injury?" At Akikyo's continued silence, Izuku smiled a bit wider. "With the lingering slime, as long as I don't really overdo it, I don't have to worry about taking rest days. I barely get sore. I thought there was a tiny bit more muscle in here. Didn't think you'd actually take me seriously. Well, you had a point about me being scrawny. And I don't want to be helpless Deku forever. Akikyo scoffed. You were never helpless to begin with, kid. Sensing Izuku's lack of belief, the man sighed. Let me put it this way. Do you think I'm wimpy or weak for never being able to throw a real punch? What? Of course not. Exactly. Just because I can't throw a punch with the force of muscle and bone behind it doesn't mean I can't fight. I just have to do it differently. So, why are you weak for lacking a quirk? Akikyo let his point sink in for a few seconds. Stop trying to measure up to their expectations of strength and work with what you've got. With how you pick apart quirks, you'd be terrifying as a hero, villain, or whatever you want to be. Izuku's eyes traveled to the set of brochures his mom had left on his desk for various high schools and programs for support and business. She'd been disconcertingly happy to hear he'd changed his goal and had been oddly supportive since then. The question of what he wanted to be still didn't have an answer. It did, but he could never be a hero. The rest of that particular visit went smoothly if Izuku spent more time thinking about something besides quirks than usual, and Akikyo was able to pull off the blood-slime separation just long enough for their blood draw. Thankfully, that was all the doctor wanted to do that day. If they'd bothered to get Izuku's weight or blood pressure, neither of them was quite sure how to fudge those results. Apparently, Akikyo also bolstered Izuku's heart during a possession, helping it pump against the increased internal pressure and the much thicker slime flowing with his blood. Izuku's mom cooked a large dinner when they got back to celebrate Izuku's normal test results, and Izuku and Akikyo enthusiastically ate 2 portions and part of a third before they started to feel full. After relaxing for a while, Izuku excused himself to go for his evening run. If that run took him by the park to drop off Akikyo, no one needed to know. The unlikely friends figured out a rough schedule for hangouts, and after the first few times and some prodding from Izuku, they started experimenting with how long Akikyo could go between possessions. Izuku made it a point to run the park trail morning and evening every weekend, just in case, and Akikyo knew how to find him if he hit his limit before the weekend came. Through trial and error, they found Akikyo's withdrawal symptoms started kicking in between 3 and 4 weeks. They didn't test past 5 weeks on Izuku's insistence. He hadn't liked the desperation that started clawing its way into Akikyo's eyes at that point. They just set up a 3-week schedule and called it a day, though Akikyo tended to visit more frequently, ostensibly for the Midoriya matriarch's excellent cooking. At least until summer break rolled around. With the break came greater freedom, both to work out and to investigate Akikyo's quirk and how long he could hold a possession. There'd only been so much they could do on weekends. Learning Akikyo could easily last 2.5 days. By this point, Izuku and Akikyo had had their arrangement for nearly 6 months, and they'd grown to trust each other to an extent. They still kept some secrets. Akikyo didn't tell Izuku where he went when he was away or what he was up to, but he did bring back increasingly detailed descriptions of quirks he'd run into and hypothetical scenarios for Izuku to analyze. Izuku in turn didn't tell him where his constantly appearing injuries came from. While Izuku's classmates largely left him alone now, other classes and the siblings of his classmates seemed immune to Akikyo's threat, but he started keeping a supply of energy bars for between meals when they were together and packing extra food for Akikyo to take with him when he left. So, when the first thing Akikyo said when they met up at the beginning of summer break was that he wanted to take Izuku to an underground doctor he'd vetted, Izuku agreed with only a few seconds of hesitation. He'd gotten used to the idea of having some amount of slime in his body at all times, but that didn't preclude him worrying about his health. Akikyo drove, but Izuku paid close attention in case he ever needed to find his way here when his friend wasn't visiting. The idea of having someone to help him treat his worse injuries was a welcome novelty. Middle school was almost over, and Izuku had no idea what high school was going to look like. Past experience told him upperclassmen could be some of the most brutal of his attackers. It never hurt to be prepared. Akikyo took them into a more rundown and industrial part of Musutafu and hung a left down an alley between 2 unlabeled warehouses. One of them had a graffiti cityscape spanning half the length of the alley. Akikyo paused a third of the way in and looked at a red cross buried in the mural. This is the spot, Izuku. He reached up and knocked on the wall of the warehouse right next to the cross in a series of 3 then 2. 10 seconds later, several locks rattled and clicked. A seam appeared in the wall, and a door cracked open. A single blue eye looked out at them. Akikyo leaned their body back and grinned. Yo, Cheshire. It's Sludge. I brought my friend, Green, if you couldn't tell, he said, gesturing at themselves. A mental nudge from Akikyo had Izuku assuming control and waving with a cautious smile. Hey! The door closed, and they heard 2 chain locks being undone. Then the door opened fully. Akikyo walked them inside, but Izuku stayed present as well, turning their head to look around the space they stepped into. Scuffed concrete, old fluorescent lights, and plastic chairs lined a makeshift waiting room. 2 walls of the room were made up of shipping containers, and the last wall had a proper door leading into what was likely an office in the building's original plans. Cheshire, who turned out to be a middle-aged woman wearing a mask over the upper half of her face, smiled a too wide, too toothy grin at them, and Izuku's anxiety melted away in seconds. He blinked in surprise. That's your quirk, isn't it? That's so cool. You must be great for panic attacks. Cheshire looked startled, and Akikyo laughed with their body. See? What did I tell YA? Green's sharp as a razor. Cheshire recovered and chuckled, fetching a clipboard and pen from the chip desk off to one side. That you did. Have a seat and fill out these forms. I'll check if Cross is free. She disappeared through the office door. The duo sat, and Izuku started filling in blanks after Akikyo told him he'd already filled out his own set a few days prior. The paper didn't ask for any identification and had a small space at the top to write in whatever alias they wanted. Considering Izuku couldn't think of anything better on short notice, he put down Green. The questionnaire was pretty standard medical history stuff, and Izuku had no trouble with it, until he found himself staring down at the entire page dedicated to detailing a patient's quirk. Old insecurities came racing back. After a while of Izuku staring and internally panicking, Akikyo eased their eyes up away from the page. He used their hand to draw a large X through the section and gave Izuku the internal torso squeeze that equated to a hug when they shared a body. Don't worry about discrimination here. If anyone gives you trouble, they'll have to deal with me. Got it? Izuku took a shaky breath and nodded. Another 10 minutes and all the pertinent papers were filled out. They walked up to the desk and slid the clipboard across to Cheshire, who'd reappeared at some point. A short time later, a bald man with teal skin, orange eyes, and a black medical mask beckoned them through the office door. Akikyo led the way. Hey, document. Sludge, the doctor greeted. When you said you'd found a partner, I imagined someone older. Oi, I never called Green a partner. He's a friend who helps me out when I have quirk withdrawal. Yes, well, I'm Cross, the local doctor of the underground and unfortunates. Pleasure to meet you, Green. Hop up on the table, and Sludge, depossess him. I'll check you over together once I have his baseline, the doctor said, waving a hand over his shoulder as he turned to start pulling supplies from drawers and shelves. He turned back around a moment later to observe Akikyo separating from Izuku. Izuku felt self-conscious under the man's gaze and hunched his shoulders. Once he was alone in his body, the standard physical exam passed quickly, followed by the doctor drawing several vials of dark red blood. Come back in 3 or 4 days, and I'll have the results of your blood work for you. Now, I'm going to use my quirk to check you over. Think of it as medical imaging. I can look through or inside of living organic matter. Sort of the quirked, video version of a CT scan, but in full color. I will need you to remove your clothes, though you can keep your boxers on. Any questions? Izuku had plenty of questions but not enough nerve to interrupt the man. After shaking his head, he awkwardly undressed. He tried not to fidget as the doctor's eyes began to glow. The man did a cursory pass, pausing for several seconds when he glanced toward Izuku's feet. Then he did a slower pass. Izuku guessed that this one was more in-depth based on the shifting intensity of the man's eye glow. After several minutes the doctor's eyes returned to normal. Fascinating. How many times have you two merged so far? Izuku and Akikyo looked at each other. They hadn't really kept count. At least a dozen? Definitely not more than 20. Izuku said with a shrug. Usually for no more than a day or two at a time. Haven't had time for any longer stints with school. Akikyo bobbed in what Izuku had learned was his version of a nod when in blob form. Akikyo could shape his body to be humanoid, but holding it tired him out after a while. Yeah, that's what we're actually getting ready to test out now that the kid's on summer break. We're not sure what my upper time limit is. The doctor nodded and wrote some notes on his clipboard. Very good. Stop by again at the end of your possession. I'll want to run some comparative scans and samples then. Once finished with note-taking, the doctor looked at Izuku. You have a surprising amount of sludge in your body even without your friend possessing you. Most of it appears to be soaked into your muscles. Oh, that's because I worked out this morning. The slime's probably still repairing the damaged muscle fibers. I won't even be sore by tomorrow. It's made getting in shape go a lot faster than I expected, Izuku said, running a hand over the distinctive bulge of his bicep. Be that as it may, I'd be happier if there was less. If that volume of slime isn't entrapped in your muscles and injuries, I'll come back to those, young man, but all goes into general circulation, it could strain your heart or at the very least give you high blood pressure. I'll be careful to pull out as much as I can when we wrap up this next possession. Akikyo hurried to assure the doctor. Satisfied, the doctor looked over his notes once more. Have you noticed any other physical changes since your arrangement started? Anything out of the ordinary before, during, or after a possession? Izuku shrugged. I haven't gotten sick at all since we started doing this. Like not even the cold that everyone in my class caught last month. And injuries heal faster, he trailed off, thinking back over his notes on Akikyo's quirk and quirk tests. The internal pressure of a possession has been less pronounced since I started gaining weight, or maybe I've just gotten used to it. And sometimes I get lightheaded right after a depossession? It usually only lasts a few minutes though. The doctor hummed. That makes sense with the sudden pressure drop. Avoid moving rapidly after separating to decrease your chance of fainting. Glancing from Izuku to Akikyo, the doctor said, All right, now for your joint exam. Izuku hadn't really thought about how uncomfortable it could be to have someone watch Akikyo possess him, but here they were. He almost choked when he caught the doctor's eyes glowing partway in. Izuku couldn't really blame the guy, he was curious how this actually worked too, but a little warning would have been nice. By this point in time, the numbness that followed in Akikyo's wake faded almost as fast as it appeared, and Izuku didn't bat an eye at the feeling of another mind sliding into his brain to overlap with his own. The familiar pressure, both physical and mental, was a comfort. A constant reminder that he wasn't alone or useless. After Akikyo finished settling in, the doctor repeated their physical exam and started asking about their joint physiology. He'd been able to see the effects on Izuku's lungs and heart as they happened with his quirk, and he seemed to catch on pretty quick that they didn't blink. Anything else? Izuku started to say no, only for Akikyo to override him and say, yes. A feeling of sheepishness reached Izuku, and he took a mental step back to let Akikyo explain. I turn off his stomach, small intestine, and pancreas when I'm in here. I'm much quicker at breaking down and absorbing nutrients, then I split them between us. Waste is still pushed off to his colon, but I figure there was no need for both of us to have entire, separate digestive systems running when we're like this. Oh, and salivary glands. Turn those off too. Why am I just finding out about this now? Izuku asked. It's kinda like the eye thing or your heart and lungs, where I just did it without thinking, and by the time I thought about it maybe being something worth mentioning it would have been awkward. Akikyo rarely rambled. So, Izuku knew the guy felt genuinely bad about not bringing it up before now. Well, that, and he could practically taste the guilt oozing from his bodymate. So, quirk instinct? Izuku asked, slouching and radiating equal parts exasperation and interest. He reeled that feeling back in after a moment and pushed a mix of acceptance and forgiveness at Akikyo. He hated it when the other sulked, especially because of his quirk or physical mutation. Izuku was supposed to be the insecure one. And Akikyo had an amazing quirk. He had absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah, we'll go with instinct. It's fine. It's not like you had a lot of opportunities to test out your quirk the way it was meant to be used. You're still learning, even if you are an old man. The corner of Izuku's lips twitched at the indignation and feigned offense that rose in their mind at the dig. The doctor watched their silent exchange wordlessly, only speaking when the duo seemed to have reached a conclusion. As fascinating as that was to watch, we should really wrap this up. I do have other patients to see today. Alright, sorry, Izuku said, holding their arm out for another blood slime drawer. The doctor pulled out a larger gauge needle this time, and Izuku paled at the sight of it. Akikyo quickly numbed the crook of their elbow before the doctor could stab them. Izuku still felt a bit queasy watching the nearly black, definitely more slime than blood, liquid that slowly oozed into the test tube. Through his connection to Akikyo, Izuku could almost imagine he still felt that piece of them as the man walked away with the tube. Izuku shuddered and put a hand over the puncture that had been sealed by the same black substance the second the needle had been removed. The doctor asked several more questions before finally giving Izuku a clean bill of health. You're welcome back here anytime, Green, whether it's for sludge-related issues or any of your other injuries. His eyes turned sharp as the doctor gave them a stern look. But I expect you two to not be doing anything besides possession. Akikyo bristled metaphorically and not so metaphorically, which was rather uncomfortable. Oi, Doc. I'm not doing any of that with a kid. We're not even having that conversation until he's at least 18. What? Izuku asked, clearly missing something. Cross just needs to get his mind out of the gutter. I'll tell you when you're older. Izuku tilted their head, curious but not sure he really wanted to know. Yeah, no. Based on the sour feeling coming from his bodymate and the expression on Cross's face, he really didn't want to know. Their appointment wrapped up quickly after that, and Izuku found out Akikyo had already paid for his visit. Cheshire cooed at Izuku's dark blush. It turned out erasing his blush did negatively impact circulation, meaning they had to stick to using it for emergencies, which only made him blush worse. Akikyo just laughed at him inside their head. Izuku beat a hasty retreat and jogged toward the trash beach to show Akikyo his progress. He had started cleaning it 3 months back when the dumbbells he'd bought stopped being a challenge. He still used the weights for stamina building and having something to do when the weather turned foul, but most of his workout routine now happened at Dagobah Municipal Beach, aka Musutafu's unofficial illegal dump. Akikyo whistled with their mouth when he saw the progress Izuku had made. Wow, Izuku. This is impressive. Izuku preened right up until Akikyo continued, you really have no life outside of school and my visits, heh? Izuku knew his friend was teasing him, but he couldn't help the indignation and defensiveness that rose in response. Hey! That's not true. I get out plenty. Running after hero fights for your quirk analysis doesn't count. Akikyo laughed when Izuku didn't have an answer for that one. Izuku instead rolled his eyes and hefted a broken microwave onto his shoulder. He picked up an old tire under his other arm and started the trek back to the stairs leading up to the street. After a few moments, Akikyo shifted the slime in their body to help support the extra weight. They both concentrated on working together for a minute before they were confidently in sync. When they were, their strengths were additive instead of individual. Hey, do you think we can lift that refrigerator yet? Izuku asked as they neared the fast food restaurant at the end of the street. As long as Izuku didn't overfill their dumpster, the manager was fine with him using it for his beach cleaning efforts. There were 2 other dumpsters Izuku had permission to use too, but this one was the closest. Akikyo helped him heft the trash into the dumpster before turning their body back to either cleared swath of sand around the monstrous appliance. It had attempted to murder them the first time Izuku'd shown Akikyo the beach. They hadn't been able to move the thing from where it had landed when it fell out of one of the stacks. Give it another month or 2. You've got a lot more muscle, but that thing isn't going anywhere. Izuku sighed but listened, grabbing his work gloves and a trash bag from the box by the stairs and moving to tackle a new trash heap. So, what do you want to do this week? We usually have to work around my schoolwork, but I can wait to start my summer project until you leave. I dunno, Akikyo said with a mental impression of a shrug. I haven't done any casual hanging out in ages aside from the occasional party, and I'm not taking a kid to one of those. What about visiting a non-trash beach? There are a few good stretches a train ride away. Akikyo made a non-committal sound. I was never that big a fan of beaches, personally. It's really difficult to get all the sand out of my body, and the saltwater dehydrates my cells. I didn't have a skin suit to protect me until recently, you see, he teased, internally poking Izuku's side where he discovered the boy was ticklish. Izuku squeaked and dropped the half-rotted phone book he'd been picking up. He sent his friend a strong feeling of disapproval before shaking his head and grinning. Well, I guess that's going on the list. It's too late today to make it there and back before dinner, but another day? Sure, kid. Akikyo descended into silent thought as they worked. Based on some of the snippets Izuku overheard, the man was trying to think of other things for them to do. Izuku didn't mind the silence. It was far better than the type he was used to when Akikyo wasn't around. Izuku loaded up his trash bag, trying to think of ideas too. Then he picked up a crushed movie case. The thing was so dirty and messed up he couldn't tell which movie disc it used to hold, but that gave him an idea. He tugged off one glove and turned on his phone. Akikyo tuned back in at the mental shift. What's up? When was the last time you went to see a movie? If you're hearing audio of this or seeing it reposted somewhere other than archive of our own, I did not consent to it, and this person is stealing. Please report them. You can find the original work on AO3 under the title Residual Hope. Akikyo laughed uproariously as the duo walked into the theater. Izuku mentally whined at his co-pilot, Akikyo, this is serious. What am I going to do? Akikyo finally got himself back under control. Why are you making such a big deal out of this, kid? Because what we just did is illegal. Fraud. Or theft at least. What if this is the first step of my downward slide into villainy? Akikyo, I can't go to prison. They'd eat me alive. Akikyo gave Izuku a patronizing mental head pat. Or, baby's first step to villainy. You'll be stringing up heroes by their leotards in no time. Izuku whined not so mentally this time, and Akikyo chuckled while suppressing the noise. Izuku, I highly doubt someone with your moral compass is going to ever go full villain. Hero society deserves to burn down if they push you that far. Hit me up if you ever decide to go that route. I know a guy or three. But, anyway, buying one ticket for two people isn't even remotely villainous. Pretty sure this is standard teenage hooliganry at best. But, are we taking up one seat or two? One. Are we watching with one set of eyes or two? Izuku paused there in the middle of the lobby and started a mental mutter storm about whether or not their arrangement qualified as having one set of eyes or two. Akikyo rolled their eyes and got them moving again while Izuku was occupied. When Izuku came back with the conclusion that they were one set of eyes but two minds processing the visual input, Akikyo had them standing in line for the snack counter. Akikyo slid out of the driver's seat with a sigh, radiating a mixture of exasperation and fondness. They ended up seeing a crime thriller about a serial killer. One half of the duo flat out refused to watch a hero movie, and Akikyo had to stop them from laughing out loud far too many times. Between Akikyo's constant pointing out of flaws in the crimes committed on screen and Izuku's pointing out how the protagonist group wasn't using even half of their quirk's potential, they stopped taking the premise seriously after the first 10 minutes. From there, they just had fun. Where others in the theater were screaming with jump scares, Izuku and Akikyo were placing bets on the ending and which of the starting cast would still be alive to see it. Akikyo ended up winning their bet and thus got to finish their sardines. Yes, they were sharing the same body at the moment, but Izuku still wasn't a terrible fan of swallowing food whole and letting the slime do all the digesting. Why did Akikyo even have teeth if he never used them? Izuku good-naturedly took a backseat as Akikyo tossed several of their sardines back at once, pretending to be more upset than he really was. He let his friend have the victory and ignored the fish sliding down his throat with ease gained from multiple possessions. After the movie, they wandered around town, talking and half-heartedly looking for something else to do before they were expected home for dinner. They didn't really find anything, but they did get to pet 2 stray cats. Izuku counted that as a win. Apparently, cats didn't usually like Akikyo, probably because of him being liquid and the whole cats not liking getting wet thing, and Akikyo pretended not to like cats either. Izuku didn't call his friend out when he took over on petting the second one. The next few days they fell into a routine: morning workout, beach cleaning followed by lunch, then city wandering, hero fight watching, beach bumming, or whatever activity caught their fancy, dinner with Izuku's mom, evening workout, then some quirk experimentation or more analysis. They'd even discovered a few new things with Akikyo's quirk, like the mental connection growing stronger the longer they were together. Where before they mostly talked or caught brief bursts of emotions or intent, they started being able to share mental images with the same ease and entire memories if they focused on it, though that tended to give them both a headache if done for more than a minute or two. They also figured out that Akikyo could ooze out of Izuku's pores like sweat. Slow, but potentially useful. The fourth night was the first time Akikyo was present for one of Izuku's nightmares. Izuku woke in a panic, images of Kaken's jeering face and hands holding him underwater still fresh in his mind. He didn't hold anything against Akikyo, but the first attempted possession in that underpass had given him a healthy fear of drowning and several nightmares in that vein. Sometimes it was Akikyo drowning him, sometimes a teacher or other classmates. Once it had even been that doctor who told him he was quirkless. He tried the hardest to forget the times it was All Might or his mom. One had killed his dream, and the other danced on its ashes. Izuku sat up in bed gulping air like he couldn't get enough, shaking and sweating. Akikyo awoke at the same time. "Hey, kid, Izuku, what's wrong? What happened?" Izuku shook his head and managed to think, "Nightmare. Sheet, kid. That SCKS. I can put you back to sleep if you want? You didn't dream the other times I did it. Maybe that'll work here." Izuku panicked even more at the thought of going back to sleep and frantically shook his head. He felt jittery with adrenaline and couldn't sit still. So, he got out of bed and paced. After a few laps of his room, the space started feeling too small, bordering on claustrophobic. "How about we go for a walk or jog? It'll clear your head and get some of that energy out," Akikyo suggested, nudging their body toward Izuku's closet. Izuku shakily nodded and grabbed the first shirt he saw from his closet and a pair of jeans. He didn't bother to ask Akikyo not to look. He'd gotten over that particular shyness a few months prior. A few minutes later the pair slipped out the front door and started jogging a familiar route around Musutafu. Akikyo started talking about his younger days and the nonsense he got up to when he was Izuku's age to give Izuku's mind something to latch onto. Izuku listened to his friend and the steady beat of his shoes on concrete. The fear and jitteriness slowly faded. Izuku was slightly out of breath and about to turn for home when he heard something that made him freeze mid-step, a quiet whimper. The noise came from the alley ahead of them. Izuku started creeping silently closer, alert for any other sounds. Akikyo was equally on edge. "Izuku, whatever you're thinking about doing, don't. Just call the cops. I left my phone charging in my room." Akikyo swore, shifting to share control with Izuku. "Don't suppose I can talk you out of whatever you're about to do?" They peeked around the corner just in time to see a young woman with torn clothes near a guy where the sun didn't shine and try to run away. The guy doubled over for a second and staggered. Then he snarled and yanked her back toward him with what looked like some type of telekinesis. He threw her deeper into the alley to land against a dumpster and started stalking toward her with one hand reaching for his belt. "Nope." Izuku lunged forward, determined and furious. Oh, some of the fury was coming from Akikyo too. Here. They hit the guy with their combined strength, knocking him flat on his stomach. Akikyo reached up to grab the guy's greasy hair and slam his head down on the pavement. Izuku stopped him from doing it a second time, checking to see if the guy was unconscious. That was his mistake. With force that was definitely augmented by his quirk, the guy threw them off. Izuku's elbow hit the concrete hard as he rolled out of the way of a kick. They and their opponent scrambled back to their feet. The criminal reached out and yanked with a motion far too similar to Izuku's mother when she used her quirk. Izuku was suddenly flying through the air toward the guy who was winding back a fist. Akikyo twisted their body, turning the devastating blow into a glancing one. He also reached out and grabbed the guy's wrist as they flew past, yanking the guy off balance and cutting their momentum before they could hit the wall. The three went down in a tangle of limbs and traded punches and scratches for a minute or two. Izuku and Akikyo's combined strength was just enough to keep the guy from overwhelming them, but they couldn't get a clear advantage either. After what felt like forever, they were both scraped up and slightly blooded. That's when Izuku got an idea. Akikyo caught it as it formed and pushed more of their blood from the shallow wounds on Izuku's arms, using his control to fling some of it in the guy's eyes. The guy screamed and wiped at his eyes, giving them the opening they needed. Slimy blood flowed over their skin to coat and cushion Izuku's knuckles as Akikyo landed a punch on the guy's face and immediately pulled back for another. This time Izuku didn't stop him, instead adding his own force to the punch. This time the guy stayed down. Izuku stood on shaky legs and stumbled his way over to the victim while Akikyo pulled all of their blood and slime back inside their body and sealed over their injuries. "Miss, are you okay?" Izuku knelt beside the lady who hadn't moved at all after being thrown and gently shook her shoulder. He got no response. Akikyo moved their hand to check her pulse. It was there, but weak. He almost relaxed, then he felt the warm liquid soaking through the knees of his jeans. He glanced down and saw the growing pool of blood for the first time. His heart seized painfully as he frantically checked her over, finally locating the wound on the back of her head. No, Izuku pulled his t-shirt off over his head and held the wadded-up fabric to her head wound while checking the woman's pockets for a phone. No. Her phone was broken. Akikyo turned their eyes to the unconscious thug. Izuku scrambled toward the guy, and Akikyo steadied their bloody hands as they searched him. He had a phone, and it worked. Izuku dialed 119 while rushing back to the woman to put more pressure on her wound, feeling despair at the blood already soaking through the fabric. Izuku nearly burst into tears when the operator picked up. "What's your emergency?" Please send an ambulance. This guy attacked a woman in an alleyway and threw her against a dumpster with his quirk. She hit her head, and there's so much blood. I can't get the bleeding to stop. Sir, can you tell me where you are? Are you safe? Is the assailant still there? He's unconscious, though I don't know for how long. I don't know where we are. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Izuku started crying then, as the operator told him they were tracing the call and to stay on the line. Police and paramedics would be there as soon as they could. Akikyo set the phone down on the pavement beside them and helped Izuku apply pressure. "Kid, it's okay. You did what you could. Help's on the way." They sat there for minutes that felt like hours. Then the woman's breathing started growing shallow. In his panic, Izuku turned to his friend, only just remembering to speak mentally to avoid the 119 operator hearing him over the call. "Akikyo, can you help her? Like you do with my injuries." Izuku felt Akikyo's hesitance and something halfway between sadness and shame. "Kid, I can't. It takes hours for me and a body's immune system to adjust to each other. She'd die from shock or blood loss long before then." Helplessness ate at the two as they listened to blood drip from Izuku's shirt, felt more blood congealing on their skin, and watched the woman's breathing slow. Izuku broke into loud sobs when her breathing stopped. The operator asked what was happening, but he couldn't get enough air to answer. Sirens finally sounded in the distance. Akikyo stood their body up, not wanting to be here when cops arrived. "Izuku!" An impression of nothingness crossed their mind. Izuku mentally nodded and welcomed it when Akikyo eased his mind into shutting down. Izuku woke up in bed and wished he hadn't. He rolled over and pulled the blankets up over his head. He distantly noted he was in pajamas, that the blood and sweat were gone from his skin, that his left cheek was swollen and right elbow stiff, though the injuries themselves were numb. He closed his eyes and lay there trying to go back to sleep despite the sunlight pouring through his window. At some point, he became aware of Akikyo hovering in his mind. He didn't say anything, but he was there. Izuku appreciated it. That faint acknowledgement prompted Akikyo to give him a hug. Izuku appreciated that too, even if he didn't react beyond starting to cry again, this time silently. At some point he fell asleep, or maybe Akikyo helped him again. Regardless of the cause, Akikyo woke him back up around noon. "Come on, Izuku. You need to eat and drink something. We missed breakfast." Izuku mechanically got up and went through the motions of his morning routine. Akikyo remained silent too but helped whenever Izuku faltered or stared off into space for too long. They ate a meal without Izuku tasting the food. He listlessly followed Akikyo's lead when the man urged him to go out for at least a run. Akikyo guided them on a slightly different route than usual, and every time Izuku started to drift somewhere far away, Akikyo reeled the boy back in with some story or question. Finally, they slowed to a stop, and Izuku looked around in confusion. Akikyo guided his eyes up to the sign of the storefront they'd stopped in front of, Miyosutafu Cat Cafe. The barest hint of a grin tugged at Izuku's lips, and they walked inside. They spent the rest of the day there, eating muffins, sipping lemon balm tea, and stroking any cat that deigned to grace them with its presence. When the sun started setting, they left, Izuku feeling a little bit lighter, and his clothes thoroughly covered in cat hair. "Sorry about earlier," Izuku said when they were halfway back. "Izuku, don't even start. That was your first close-up look at death, and you're still a kid. Of course, it messed you up. I'm just glad you weren't alone when it happened." Izuku could feel the concern radiating from Akikyo. He tried sending the impression of a hug to his friend. "Thanks for looking out for me." Izuku sighed, feeling his emotions hanging heavy around his shoulders. "I just wish I could have done more. Maybe if we'd taken that guy down faster, or if I hadn't stopped you that first time, paramedics could have arrived in time." Akikyo nudged his mind, and Izuku stopped. "Don't play the what-if game. It's impossible to win. We can plan for next time though." "Next time?" Akikyo used their body to scoff. "Are you seriously going to try and convince me that you won't play hero the next time you see someone getting hurt?" "I can't be a hero," Izuku said reflexively, too many people's voices playing in his ear. Akikyo growled. "Vigilante then. Point is, you're not going to stop helping people, as much as it would help me sleep at night. You're going to keep finding stuff like me or last night, and you're going to get involved. You have an MO, kid." Izuku felt a little uncomfortable at the comparison to criminals, but Akikyo wasn't wrong, really. Izuku did have an established pattern of behavior when it came to people in trouble. "But I can't be a vigilante either. Vigilantes are such because they're using their quirks illegally." Akikyo stretched their face in a familiar smile. "Then it's a good thing you don't have a quirk. It's kinda hard to arrest you for vigilantism without one." Izuku stopped walking at that, and Akikyo took over to prevent them blocking the flow of traffic. Izuku didn't have a quirk. He'd never thought of that as an advantage before, and it felt like his mind was breaking just a little contemplating it being one now. Then he remembered what Akikyo said months ago about finding his own way to fight. Izuku still wasn't sure about the whole vigilantism thing. But two things were for sure. His luck was terrible, he'd always find trouble or it him. And he didn't want to be too slow to move or unable to contribute in a fight again. Next time he tried to save someone, he wanted them saved. "What did you have in mind?" Akikyo said he had to check a few things to solidify his idea, but he didn't want to be with Izuku when he did, just in case anything went wrong. Izuku was a bit annoyed, but he understood. Besides, splitting up now would ruin their experiment. They were already 5 whole days in on their possession, and neither of them wanted to lose that progress. So, they put Izuku's battle readiness on hold. They went back to the cat cafe on the 6th day, and though Izuku still wasn't 100% there, he did talk more to Akikyo. And the cats. The cats were excellent listeners. On day 7 Izuku tried to get back into his workout routine, maybe throwing himself into it a little too much. He kept forgetting that he ran out of breath more easily when Akikyo was possessing him. Despite that, they made good progress on clearing another trash mound. Izuku and Akikyo didn't realize until they broke for lunch that they'd worked in sync almost the entire morning. This sparked one of Izuku's animated theorizing sessions about how the longer they were together in one go, the better attuned to each other they got. They both wondered if it would carry over to the next time. After that productive morning, they decided to relax and watch a movie marathon from the comfort of Izuku's couch. On day 8, the duo got out of bed feeling weird, vaguely uncomfortable, and antsy. It took all of 10 minutes for them to wake up enough to realize they were hitting Akikyo's time limit. They forewent the usual morning routine to book it to the underground doctor. Neither of them was sure what happened if Akikyo hit his limit while still inside someone, but they did not want to find out. Cross saw them immediately and did a quick exam and blood draw before giving them the go-ahead to separate. The pair followed their usual depossession routine, with Izuku sitting on the exam table rather than the ground. The only difference was Akikyo following Cross's advice to pull as much slime as possible out on exit. When they were fully separated, Akikyo let out a sigh of relief, before shouting in alarm as Izuku collapsed onto his side on the table, blinking sluggishly. Akikyo and Cross positioned him more comfortably while the doctor took his vitals and scanned him with his quirk. Izuku tried to wave them off, saying dazedly, "I'm okay." He convinced exactly no one. Ignoring the boy, Cross reported, his blood pressure tanked. He's not going anywhere until his body readjusts. Cross took a quick blood sample from Izuku and slime sample from Akikyo. When Izuku still hadn't quite recovered by the end of that, the doctor sighed, heading for a door neither of the duo had been through before. "Bring him in here. You two can have this room until Green is able to leave. I'll go over your pre-long-term possession blood results with you after he's stable. I have another patient to see in the meantime." Akikyo picked Izuku up carefully and flowed his way over to the room in question. Izuku blearily looked around. It looked a bit like a hospital room, but everything was outdated and worn. He swore he only blinked, and he was on the gurney that served as a bed. There was a sensor attached to his finger and a machine beeping away beside the bed. There was also a tall glass of some drink on the bedside table. He felt a bit better now and tried to sit up. A mass of slime was behind him in an instant, helping leverage him up. "Careful. You passed out for a few minutes. How are you feeling?" Akikyo asked, keeping a slimy appendage around Izuku's shoulders just in case. "Better. Tiny bit woozy, but the room isn't spinning anymore," Izuku said, reaching for the drink. Akikyo fetched it with a tendril of slime and handed it to him. "Thanks." He took a sip and wrinkled his nose when he realized it was one of those electrolyte drinks that no one could make taste good. He downed it anyway, knowing he'd probably feel better for it. Akikyo went to fetch the doctor while Izuku drank. 15 minutes to recover this time, Cross stated as he walked into the room. "I take it that's longer than any of your prior recovery periods." Izuku nodded. "Yeah, it's only ever been 2 or 3 minutes the other times. Is it because we were together so long this time?" "Actually, I think it was because Akikyo took all that excess slime with him." When both parties gave him confused looks, Cross sighed. Your body had gotten used to that extra mass taking up space in your body and bloodstream and accommodated as best it could. When he took almost all of it this time, your body had to adjust back to nearly where it was before you two ever started your arrangement. As long as Akikyo is careful not to leave excess behind in the future, I don't see this being a repeat problem. If you're still concerned, I'd recommend coming back here next time you depossess after a long stint together. That settled, Cross moved on to their test results. Akikyo's appeared as normal as it ever was for him, being made entirely of slime. Izuku grinned a bit into his drink hearing that. He'd noticed Akikyo's color seemed brighter, or at least less murky, lately, and the yellow tint to his eyes had faded since they'd started hanging out. Whether that was due to their possessions or Akikyo getting more frequent, good quality meals, Izuku wasn't sure, but he didn't plan on changing anything he was doing. Izuku's blood showed more interesting results. Nearly 5% of his sample had been slime, which was a lot when they considered how much even that volume thickened his blood, and even more slime had been tied up in his muscles at the time. All of his other values came back normal. Then the doctor mentioned sending off a small sample to a colleague of his to run a more specialized test. They now knew how Akikyo's quirk convinced a host's immune system to play nice with him. The slime cells in Izuku's blood sample had all of the same cell surface markers as Izuku's cells and vice versa. Their immune systems literally couldn't tell their cells apart. "I'm fairly certain that the process affected both of your cells rather than just Sludge's. Some of the markers on your cells, green, are only seen in those with extensive physical mutations." The man gave Izuku's feet a pointed look. Izuku tucked his feet and their telltale double pinky toe joints under him. Right, the guy knew he was quirkless from his scans. While Izuku was busy being self-conscious, Akikyo asked, Will that cause any problems long-term? Not that I can tell. His immune system has been thoroughly fooled into believing both sets of markers belong there. The only potential problems I can think of would arise if you possess someone else long enough to adapt to them before returning to green, and this is a small chance but shouldn't be ruled out if you two are separate long enough for all of the sludge to leave green system naturally. It's possible that the sludge's continued presence is reinforcing your quirk's effect. Should that happen, his body may react negatively to a repossession and need to be acclimated again. Well, that's not too bad as far as test results go, Izuku said, smiling. At least we know the residual slime isn't slowly eating me or something. Akikyo laughed, shaking his whole form. Izuku smiled a bit wider when he felt that small tug that reassured him he still had some connection to his friend. Cross rolled his eyes at the both of them and shooed them from the clinic. In the lobby, Akikyo stopped Izuku to say, "I'll look into that thing we talked about. See you in 2 weeks." "Sure. You know where to find me," Izuku said, giving Akikyo a cheeky grin. "Don't let your bullies catch you. And don't let the cops catch you." "Oh my word, you two are adorable," Cheshire said, startling both of them. Izuku blushed. Akikyo condensed in on himself. It was 1 week and 5 days later when Akikyo popped back up, guiding Izuku into a back alley along his jogging route by tugging on the slime in his system. "Hey, Akikyo," Izuku said, slightly out of breath. He was about 3/4 of the way through his run. He'd been aiming to up his sprinting endurance. "What's up?" Akikyo smiled excitedly. "Izuku, I think I found someone to teach you to fight. Do you have time today?" he asked, gesturing between them with a slime tendril. Izuku nodded and held one finger up. "Just let me catch my breath first." A few minutes later Izuku nodded again, and Akikyo got on with possessing him. They took a deep breath as Akikyo settled into place and sent a few mental images and snippets of memory back and forth to test how their expanded mental connection had fared after their separation. To their surprise, it was largely intact. Sharing memories had gotten more difficult again, but images and sensations still transferred as easily as words. They started walking home while Akikyo gave Izuku more details. "We'll need to get you a mask or disguise unless you want everyone in the underworld to know your babyface, but this guy's one of the safest I could find for the job. He's got a thing against anyone who hurts kids, and he said he'd be cool with teaching you some basic self-defense. I mean, we still have to pay him, but he's relatively trustworthy." "And what sort of payment does he take?" Izuku asked cautiously. Akikyo gave him one of his increasingly common mental head pats. "Always watch for the catch." "Good job. So, that's the thing. Guy wasn't interested in money when I offered, but has been having some trouble with his quirk. I may or may not have mentioned your skill with quirk analysis." Akikyo shrank to the far side of their shared mind. "What's wrong with his quirk?" Izuku asked, choosing to ignore the fact that Akikyo had apparently been bragging about him, and the way Akikyo shrinking away from him made him feel bad. Akikyo relaxed as he said, "You'll see when we get there. But first, disguise. No offense, Izuku, but the green hair and eyes are pretty recognizable. We'll need to hide those." Akikyo stopped their body outside a discount clothing store, pointedly directing their eyes toward it. Izuku sighed. "Okay, but I'm not trying on clothes while I'm sweaty and gross. We're going home, and I'm getting a shower first. You hungry? We can grab brunch too." An hour later they stood back outside of the store, shopping bag in hand. While they were out, Izuku also took them by a sporting goods store to pick up elbow and knee pads as well as some fingerless gloves with padded knuckles. He remembered how banged up his elbow and knuckles had been after that fight in the alley, and that was with Akikyo helping protect and speed heal him. Izuku needed something for when Akikyo wasn't around. His co-pilot agreed but made a snide comment about the woman in the alley almost getting away from her assailant by hitting him in the crotch. Following the unspoken advice, Izuku picked up one other piece of protective gear. If he blushed furiously at checkout, no one but Akikyo needed to know. By the time afternoon rolled around, Izuku was dressed for his first meeting with his new sensei. A knit cap hid his curls, and sunglasses shaded his eyes. He had his other protective gear on too, earning him a few odd looks as he jogged down the street, heading for the industrial side of town again. Their meeting place was only a few blocks from Cross's clinic, closer to the waterfront. Now Mamoru, that's his given name, he doesn't hand out his family name, works at the port and does a bit of smuggling on the side. You ever need something foreign made, he's your guy, or he'll know who to put you in contact with. Pretty sure he has a family, but don't ask. That's a general rule here, kid. Don't go prying into people's personal lives. Got it? Got it. Good. Now, slow down. You look like you're running from someone. Akikyo took partial control, enough to slow their pace and straighten out their posture into one more relaxed and confident, eyes looking straight ahead. If you act like you belong and like no one here could hope to mess with you, the smart ones won't. Some of the dumb ones might still, and you'll need to put them on the ground quick to prove a point. Izuku wasn't too sure he'd be able to take anyone down but paid close attention, trying to match the stride and way Akikyo held their body. It was hard when he was so used to making himself small and keeping his eyes down at school, but he started to get the hang of it by the time they reached their destination. Akikyo knocked confidently in a 2-2 pattern. A moment later, the door swung open. A burly man twice Izuku's height and probably 3 times his mass looked down at him with a cigarette stuck in the side of his mouth. His skin was weathered and tanned and his gold eyes sharp. One of his hands morphed into a bowie knife as Izuku watched. He raised an eyebrow at Izuku. Izuku gulped. Akikyo stepped forward and waved at Mamoru. Hi. Sludge told me to meet you here. I'm a friend of his. At the impression of a question Izuku sent Akikyo, he responded mentally, he doesn't know that I sometimes possess you. Remember his whole not hurting kids thing? Just don't mention my quirk use around him. I'd prefer not to have one of my eyes shish kebabbed because of a misunderstanding. Right, taking the reins on their body again, Izuku said out loud, I have terrible luck and always seem to find trouble. He said you'd be able to help with self-defense. Mamoru sized him up and nodded once before stepping away from the door. His hand slowly dropped its transformation. Yeah, kid, and he said you'd be able to help me with my quirk. He didn't sound terribly convinced, more like he was amused and humoring Izuku. With a gentle push from Akikyo, Izuku nodded. Tell me about it and what's been going on. He pulled a pocket notebook and pen from his cargo shorts. Mamoru let out a sigh laced with cigarette smoke, but he did start talking. It's called weapon hands. He held up his right hand and turned it first into a sword, then a gun, flamethrower, and chainsaw in quick succession. Any weapon, though if it requires ammo, that takes more out of me. The problem is it's been activating on its own the last couple of weeks when I'm startled. Kinda a problem when I want to hold my N. He cleared his throat. Anyway, got any suggestions? The man trailed off, giving Izuku a look. You forgot to give him a name, kid, Akikyo whispered. You can call me, Green. Izuku frowned as he looked over the page he'd written on. He was missing something. Quirks didn't start acting up for no reason. Has anything else changed in the last month? It doesn't have to be quirk-related. Mamoru took another pull from his cigarette before taking the stub from his mouth and dropping it to the concrete to grind under his heel. Yeah, a lot. My friend just had their kid, but they won't let me around when I smell of cigarette smoke. It's bad for the baby or something. So, I've been trying to quit. It isn't going well. Have you talked to Cross? That sounds like something he could help with, Izuku said while searching quit smoking on his phone. Can't afford him right now, and I won't have anything he needs to trade for until 2 weeks from now. If Mamoru was so big on fair trade, Izuku really didn't get why the guy was asking Izuku for help with his quirk. He was just a kid, after all. Izuku's feeling of confusion prompted Akikyo to say, "He's proud, Midoriya. He doesn't want our money for teaching you to defend yourself, something you should have been taught anyway, but we couldn't accept his training without offering something. Second rule of the underground, owe no one anything if you can help it. So, by offering your quirk analysis, his morals are satisfied, but we avoid incurring a debt." Izuku mentally hummed, getting how dangerous owing someone a favor could be. A few classmates in the past had been nice to him just long enough to guilt him into giving them something they wanted. He chewed on his lip as he thought and wrote and read what he'd found on his phone. Does your quirk act up more when you're trying to quit? Mamoru narrowed his eyes. After a moment's thought, he nodded. Yeah, how'd you figure that? Izuku held his phone out for the man to look at. A list of nicotine withdrawal symptoms was pulled up. Jumpiness and anxiety, Izuku said quietly. Those can impact quirk use. For a lot of people, quirks can act as a defense mechanism. So, when you're already on edge and are startled. Mamoru's eyes widened in realization. My quirk reacts. He frowned. So, how do I stop it and smoking? Can't get near my friend's baby without stopping the cigarettes, but I can't hold her if my hands could turn into weapons at the slightest surprise. Maybe nicotine patches? For a short-term solution anyway. I'm not too knowledgeable on fighting addictions, Izuku said, scratching the back of his head through his cap. For your quirk, what defines a weapon? What do you mean? I mean, how does your quirk pick what it can turn your hands into? Because you can knock someone out with a baseball bat or a frying pan, and those are a lot less dangerous to have your hands turn into than a chainsaw if you're holding a baby. Maybe you can train yourself to initially respond to threats with less lethal options before you jump straight to katana or revolver. Mamoru stared at his hand for a second, and it turned into an iron skillet. The man blinked and nodded his head, impressed. He shot Izuku a sideways glance before turning his hand into one of those electrified tennis rackets for killing bugs. After a few more moments of staring at his hand, the guy shook his head. Demon, I can't do a plain old fly swatter. Izuku laughed, and Mamoru grinned. You all right, kid? Now, it's your turn. Let's take a look at what we're working with. The man popped his neck and rolled his shoulders. It was far more intimidating than it had any right to be. Izuku's laughter died and he gulped. What? Mamoru crouched and motioned Izuku forward. Come on, Green. Show me how you throw a punch. Izuku had a lot more bruises the following few weeks, but they barely fazed him. They were less severe than anything his classmates gave him, and far more worthwhile. Izuku was slowly learning his way around a back alley fight. After gauging his general ineptitude in a spar, Mamoru taught him how to take a hit and fall in ways that minimize damage. Then they'd moved on to dodging and blocking. After all, it was better to avoid a hit than take one. Once Izuku was passable with those, they moved on to strikes, throws, locks, and chokeholds. Mamoru had gone a few rounds as a street fighter when he was younger and knew plenty of tricks, dirty and otherwise, that he was happy to impart. He wasn't, however, a trained fighter. There was no specific form or art to what he knew, aside from the art of survival. Izuku soaked it all up as quickly as he could. He loved learning, and it was so interesting seeing the differences between a real fight and how heroes fought on primetime TV. The real problem came in unlearning. Every time Mamoru yelled or sounded angry, which was not often after the first incident, Izuku had to fight not to freeze or make himself a smaller target. When a strike caught him off guard, Izuku flinched. When they grappled, sometimes Izuku panicked and had to stop himself, checking for burns that didn't exist. Mamoru never said anything when those moments occurred, but he did call a short water or snack break each time. He'd show Izuku something new he figured out how to make with his quirk: a power drill, a plank of wood, a pair of shears. Then he'd joke about how many career options he'd missed out on because he never got creative with his quirk. After laughing at the idea of Mamoru being a barber or an electrician, they'd continue training. That was the usual pattern. Today didn't follow it. Green, why are you favoring your left arm? They'd only been sparring for 5 minutes when Mamoru called him out. Izuku turned slightly to put his left side away from his teacher. I don't know what you're talking about, Mamoru-sensei. Mamoru raised an eyebrow at him and didn't break eye contact. After a few tense seconds, Izuku caved. He sighed and looked at the dirty, concrete floor as he gingerly lifted his left sleeve to expose his shoulder. One of my bullies cornered me. Of all the rotten luck, he ran into Kaken on his run this morning. Literally. Deku? The blonde asked, looking Izuku up and down. This was the first time they'd seen each other out of Aldera's uniform in years. This was the first time Kaken had seen Izuku in short sleeves and shorts since he started working out. And oh, was there a difference? Kaken's face of annoyance flickered with incredulity before darkening. What do you think you're doing, useless? Nerd? You said you gave up on being a hero. So, what the hell is this? You take me for one of those idiot extras? Kaken made a grab for the front of Izuku's shirt. Izuku knew it was coming the moment Kaken got that particular shade of rage in his eyes reserved for only him. Without thinking, he deflected Kaken's hand and stepped out of range and into a more stable stance. They both froze as they realized what Izuku had done. Izuku's blood ran cold as he started backing away, dropping his hands out of the defensive position they'd fallen into out of habit. Kaken, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Huh? You think you can take me? And no. I'll teach you to look down on me. Izuku had never been truly ashamed that he didn't fight back before, but something about showing Mamoru his injuries made the unpleasant emotion fester and tears build in his eyes. He was used to this. Why did this time bother him so much? A light touch on his arm made him flinch. Izuku blinked to clear the tear haze from his eyes and looked up to see Mamoru crouched slightly at his side, examining the bandage pasted over the outside of his shoulder and top of his arm. Mamoru shot him a glance, and at Izuku's nod, peeled it carefully off. Izuku grimaced as he felt a small piece of damaged skin pull away with the dressing. He'd had trouble gauging if he got the bandage far enough around the back of his shoulder, and he apparently hadn't. Once the bandage was fully off, they looked at the damage. A distinctly hand-shaped burn glared back at them. Several of the blisters had popped with all the movement of jogging, limping, home after the encounter and sparring just now. A thin sheen of green-black coated and sealed the areas that should be oozing. Akikyo's quirk was hard at work. Even with the residual slime to help things along, Izuku knew from experience that this burn was going to scar. He had several bruises and a starburst burn on his side as well, but this was the only bad injury today. Mamoru swore and rolled Izuku's sleeve up to keep the fabric off of the ruined skin. Then he gently hauled Izuku toward the door by his good arm. Come on, Green, we're going to see Cross. That already looks infected. It's not, I promise. The odd color is from a friend's quirk. It has a lingering effect that speeds up healing and prevents infection, Izuku said, hurrying to slip his medical mask back on before they got outside. He didn't bother to wear it when they sparred, but going to and from the warehouse? Better safe than sorry when it came to his identity. Yeah, I'll wait for the doc's verdict on this one, Green. Can you not feel it? How were you sparring with me? Izuku knew from investigation on the internet that a burn that didn't hurt was a very bad thing. He kinda got why Mamoru was so worried now. Oh. No, I can feel it. It hurts a lot, but I'm used to it. That was the wrong thing to say, judging by the way Mamoru's hand tightened on Izuku's right arm before easing up. They walked in tense silence for a few blocks before Mamoru broke it. Kid! Do me a favor? Next time you run into the villain that did this to you, throat punch them for me. Izuku sputtered and waved his arms in front of him, ignoring both the pain in his left shoulder and the grimace on Mamoru's face as he watched the gesture. No! Kei is not a villain. He's going to be a hero. Green, I don't know how to tell you this, but heroes aren't supposed to do crap like that. Especially not to civilians or children. Mamoru's face contorted like he was struggling not to swear up a storm or strangle someone. Legally, your bully is already a villain. He has no license, yet he used his quirk in public and to intentionally harm someone. That's the textbook definition, kid. But. No buts. There is nothing that can justify that, he said, gesturing at the open wound. Izuku bit his tongue and hunched in on himself. He jammed his hands in his pockets. Mamoru didn't understand. Kaken was going to be a hero. It was Izuku's own fault for not watching where he was going. He was always bothering Kaken, and his childhood friend was stressed out about the UA entrance exam coming up in only 3 months. He had a lot on his plate, and Izuku was, well, Deku. He always seemed to push Kaken's buttons, no matter how hard he tried not to. If he was smarter, better, he'd have figured out how to avoid setting his friend off by now, but here he was. A failure with a 10-year streak and still going strong. Izuku let out a bitter laugh and rubbed just below his burn. He deserved the pain. Why couldn't Mamoru-sensei understand? Izuku realized abruptly that he'd never told his teacher that he was quirkless. That explained it. It made sense. Izuku felt suddenly guilty. His teacher wouldn't be so worried if he knew, but Izuku couldn't bring himself to spit it out. Was that selfish? Not wanting to lose the only nice teacher he'd had since preschool? Hey, kid. Stop. You're going to hurt yourself. Strong hands pried Izuku's hand away from his left arm. He hadn't even realized he'd been squeezing. Part of the wound was oozing now, despite the slime. Izuku's face burned with shame all the way to the tips of his ears. Sorry, he said barely above a whisper. The rest of the trip to the underground clinic was passed in silence as Izuku kept his eyes glued ahead. When they reached the door, Mamoru released him. Do you want me to stay, or would you rather go in alone? You don't have to stay. Cross already knows me. Mamoru nodded. Take 2 weeks off, Green. We'll work double time after you're healed up, got it? Izuku nodded and tried to give his teacher a smile. After the man didn't go anywhere, Izuku sighed and knocked the 3-2 sequence on the wall. Mamoru started walking away when the locks clicked open. Cheshire's smile fell for the first time Izuku had ever seen when she got a look at his shoulder. She ushered him inside and fast-walked to the office door before disappearing inside. There was one other person in the lobby today. The man was covered in burn scars that made even Izuku wince. The man looked up to meet Izuku's eyes briefly before glancing at the obvious wound on his shoulder. He dipped his head in acknowledgement before going back to messing around with his phone. Izuku took a seat on the opposite side of the room and did likewise. A woman bundled in more layers than made sense for this time of year hobbled out of the office a few minutes later. Then it was Scar Guy's turn. He was in and out in under 15 minutes, and Izuku and he exchanged a wordless goodbye. Then it was Izuku's turn. Instead of just Cross, this time Cheshire joined them with an armful of supplies. Izuku hopped up on the exam table and pulled his shirt and cap off before either could say anything. Cheshire made a high-pitched sound in the back of her throat when she saw him do it. The doctor just shook his head. All right, Green. Aside from the obvious, where are you hurt? Izuku dutifully pointed out his developing bruises and the mild explosion burn on his side. The pair carefully catalogued the injuries. Then the doctor prodded at the bruise on his chest. Thankfully, his ribs were fine. Then they finally addressed the elephant in the room. Izuku sat there stoically as Cross and Cheshire cleaned his burnt shoulder, only wincing when they had to pull a few fibers from his shirt and a hair from where they'd been caked onto the wound. Second degree. You're lucky, Cross said, pointing to where Kaken's thumb had pressed over the edge of his collarbone. Any deeper here, and you'd risk having a piece of bone die. Cross frowned deeply as he retrieved 2 tubes from the supplies Cheshire had brought in. He looked Izuku up and down with pursed lips before saying carefully, Cheshire knows somewhere safe you can stay until Sludge is back in town, should you need it. Cheshire nodded enthusiastically. It's just me and one of the girls right now. You'd love her quirk, Green, and neither of us would mind the company. Izuku looked between the pair, bewildered. Why would I? Then it clicked. Oh. No, this wasn't from home. Mom would never. Home is safe. I just got really unlucky and ran into one of my bullies this morning. Cross seemed satisfied enough with that answer and started dressing Izuku's burn, explaining the process for when Izuku needed to change it himself the following day. Then he put the open tubes and 2 pill bottles into a paper bag, added some bandaging materials, and handed the lot to Izuku. Follow the direction on each medication, and yes, you need them. At least until the burn seals over completely and the unbroken skin peels. And no exercising or using that arm for anything strenuous until then either. Come back if anything seems amiss, if it doesn't appear to be healing properly, or if as the skin heals and tightens you start having issues with your range of motion. Izuku tightened his grip on the paper bag, crinkling it. What about payment? Izuku asked. Oh, I was going to put it on Sludge's tab, Cheshire said with a smile. Izuku narrowed his eyes at her not-so-subtle quirk use. Nope, this one's on me. I'll pay. When Cross and Cheshire shared a look but didn't immediately answer, Izuku decided to take a page from his interactions with Mamoru. Do you accept payment in quirk analysis? If they didn't before, they did now. Izuku walked from the underground clinic grinning. He'd analyzed both Cross and Cheshire's quirks, and they'd even set up a sort of request system for other patrons who were having issues with their quirks in exchange for Izuku getting credit at the clinic in the case of a trade or a cut of the payment if they paid in cash. An extra slip of paper was tucked inside his paper bag with both of the medics, vigilantes, phone numbers and instructions on how to get a burner phone. It doesn't do to mix one's identities, Cheshire had said with a wink. The burner phone could wait though. His accelerated healing was beginning to catch up to him, and he desperately wanted a nap. His mom was still at work when he got home, so he poured one pill from each vial and threw some leftovers in the microwave. While his food heated, he searched the names of the medications on his phone. One was a pain med, one of the stronger ones, and the other. Why did he give me something for anxiety? Akikyo visited a little over a week after Izuku's run-in with Kaken. Izuku roused from where he had fallen asleep on the sofa while editing his summer project to the sound of knocking. Izuku rubbed his eyes as he stumbled to the door. The pain medication did its job, but combined with the drain of accelerated healing, it tended to knock Izuku right out for the first few hours after a dose. "Hello." Izuku croaked as he opened the door. Then he squinted and tilted his head. Maybe he should have read the side effects of his medication more thoroughly. Akikyo had forced himself to look as human-shaped as possible and found a dirty trench coat to throw on and hide most of his body. It really did nothing to hide his face. If not for the fact that he'd been inactive for 7 months, he'd almost definitely have gotten caught by some hero or cop. Finally deciding that this was probably not a hallucination, the jury was still out on it being a weird dream. Izuku stepped aside, saying, "Oh, hi Akikyo. Come in." Akikyo hesitated for half a moment before stepping inside. The second the door was closed, he sighed in relief and let his body return to a much more comfortable amorphous shape. "Izuku, where have you been? I've been staking out your jogging route for 3 days. You okay?" Izuku hummed as he collapsed face-first onto the sofa, careful not to jar his left shoulder. "Bully. Cross. Meds. Tired," he mumbled as he rolled over to look at his friend hovering at the end of the couch. Izuku focused long enough to debate whether letting Akikyo possess him while he was this out of it on pain meds was a good idea. Would that dilute the effect, or would Akikyo be just as drugged? Were any medications harmful to Akikyo due to his different physiology? "Kid, hey. Pay attention. You're hurt." Izuku yawned and nodded, forcing himself to sit up to show he was listening. At the searching look his friend gave him, Izuku pulled up his sleeve to show the half-healed burn. It was mostly sealed over, but the skin was still pink and angry. A few places were starting to peel. Akikyo eyed the burn for a minute before picking up Izuku's pill bottles to read the labels. Izuku had started spacing out again when Akikyo took a long breath and drew his attention again. "Izuku, are you good with a possession right now? I can help that heal faster and numb it so you can stop the pain meds and feel more alert." I'll probably fall asleep again though. That fine?" "Yeah, I could do with a nap too. Didn't get much sleep the last few nights." A minute and a half later, they sat on the couch together, Izuku already fading. One of them lowered their body to lay down on the sofa, and they drifted off. If you're hearing audio of this or seeing it reposted somewhere other than archive of our own, I did not consent to it, and this person is stealing. Please report them. You can find the original work on AO3 under the title Residual Hope. Akikyo hung out with Izuku for the next several days, even tagging along for Izuku's return to training with Mamoru. Or well, when he was supposed to restart training with Mamoru. "Sorry, short stack," one of the truck drivers said. "I haven't seen Mamoru since Saturday. He missed clocking in for his shift yesterday too. Boss isn't real happy with him right now. I wouldn't want to be him when he gets back." Izuku frowned but nodded. "Do you think something happened to him?" Izuku asked Akikyo as they walked away from the container yard. They'd spent the last 2 hours asking around, and no one at the cargo port had seen Mamoru since the weekend shift clocked out. "It's possible. He may have had to go to ground if cops or a hero started sniffing around his side business. If he'd been arrested, the gossip would be everywhere." "So, it's not that," Akikyo said, equally unsettled. If someone had gone after Mamoru, did they watch him first? Did they know about his meetings with Green and Sludge? The duo turned their eyes to scan their surroundings for a possible tail as they walked a little bit faster. I'll ask around to find you a new teacher. If he went to ground, he's not going to be back in these parts for a while. If there's too much heat, he may have to set up shop in a different city entirely. Izuku sulked at the thought. He'd really liked Mamoru, but he understood. Mamoru couldn't help provide for his sister and niece if he got locked up. Family came first. Not that he was supposed to know about Mamoru-sensei's family, but they were the man's lock. Screen. The family resemblance was pretty obvious. He just hoped his former teacher was safe wherever he was. Focusing back on their next step, Izuku asked, "This something you need to do alone again?" Akikyo shifted slightly in their body. "Yeah. Sorry, kid. I'm thinking I might contact a broker this time to put out a sort of help wanted alert for this area. My own contacts are about exhausted at this point. Everyone I know and trust enough to ask is too far away to teach you. But if you ever move down to Nagoya, I got you covered." Izuku laughed inside their mind, only allowing a smile to show externally. Noted. "So, were you going to head out today?" Or, Izuku trailed off, not wanting to sound clingy or needy, but anxious all the same at the thought of another friend leaving when one of the few he had just went missing. Akikyo was silent for a moment, something like hesitance and consideration drifting from his side of their mind, though Izuku couldn't overhear any concrete thoughts. A siren started up close by, and Akikyo turned their head in the direction of it. If they listened closely, they could hear what sounded like a fight. "Well, I was going to, but I wouldn't want you to miss that hero fight, now would I? Come on. You critique the quirks, and I'll critique whatever lame brain scheme the villain tried to pull this time," he said, nudging their body forward. Izuku grinned, seeing exactly what his friend was doing and having no complaints. By the time the fight cleanup was done, Akikyo was going to claim he was hungry and that they should get home for dinner. Then he'd make some excuse to stay the night. He really had to leave tomorrow though. They were already a week into this possession, and neither of them was willing to risk whatever consequence might occur should they go over Akikyo's 8-day limit. Izuku intended to enjoy the company while he could though. He retrieved a pocket notebook and pen from his shorts as they jogged toward the disturbance. His smile grew even wider when he recognized the hero involved in this takedown. Bamboo Man, aka Takeshita Yoshioki, wasn't a local hero, which made this an even rarer treat. Izuku had only ever seen him on the news and hero forums before. Izuku rapidly scrawled notes on his fighting style based in some type of martial art involving weapons given the expertise with which he handled his bamboo canes. His quirk, bamboo manipulation, appeared quite versatile as well. When the villain, one of the countless with a knife or sharpened appendages quirk, managed to land a hit on the hero's side, Izuku and many of the other bystanders gasped, afraid they'd just witnessed a hero's murder. But they needn't have worried. The man's costume shifted and stiffened on the side being attacked. Bamboo Man's costume was made entirely of bamboo fibers, Izuku realized. The hero had left that opening on purpose. The blade barely bit into Bamboo Man's costume, and the hero took the opportunity to trap the villain's arm against his side. Then he punched the villain with his free hand, disorienting them enough to allow the hero to pin and cuff them. He wrote furiously, trying to preserve every detail. The forum posts hadn't done the hero justice at all. Akikyo laughed in their shared headspace. "You say that about every hero you get to watch in person." "Because it's true." Izuku protested. Heroes' quirks were all so amazing. And no one online ever bothered to record all the little details and intricacies that were so important. Like how Bamboo Man's entire costume was armor without looking like it, or his skill in quirkless combat. There was so much to learn from each of them. Izuku faltered and lowered his pen as it occurred to him that he was still thinking like he could learn how to be a hero. His mood plummeted between one breath and the next. There was a familiar ache in his heart where his dream had been. Why did he still act as if he stood a chance? No matter how much quirk knowledge he gained, he was never going to have a quirk of his own. He'd never be a hero or hold a candle to those who were. What good did all his notes and theories do? The few times he'd acted like a hero, he or the victim had gotten hurt. A mental shove forcibly dispelled Izuku's train of thought and made him stumble physically. "Izuku, knock it off!" Akikyo yelled. "You don't need a DMN quirk. You're plenty without one. You helped me, didn't you? And you convinced me not to kill that lady or any of the other 10 people I'd have probably killed by now to satisfy my quirk. You, quirkless but kind to a fault, Izuku did that. Yeah, we messed up back in that alley, but that death is on the villain, not us. He got arrested and will face consequences thanks to us." Izuku hesitantly nodded, trying not to cry. He still felt guilty, now doubly so for making Akikyo worry about him. He pulled back a little, letting Akikyo have control while he tried to get his emotions in order. The last time he bawled at the scene of a hero fight, the paramedics thought he'd been hurt and didn't let him leave for 30 minutes. Akikyo sighed with their body as he took the driver's seat. Then he took a step forward. Toward the dissolving police line. "Akikyo!" Akikyo didn't answer but let a bit of reassurance and determination reach Izuku through their connection. Izuku didn't stop him but sent a mental question mark back as they approached Bamboo Man. No one stopped them, though with his notebook still in hand, everyone likely thought he was going to ask for an autograph. "I'm not getting you an autograph, kid," Akikyo said with feigned exasperation. "Just listen." "Excuse me, Bamboo Man?" Akikyo said out loud. The hero turned toward them and smiled when he spotted them. "Hey there, kiddo. What can I do for you? Your quirk is so cool." Akikyo exclaimed with very fake enthusiasm. Izuku cringed hearing it. Apparently, no one else picked up on it though. "Can I ask you some questions?" Bamboo Man glanced over at the police who were on scene before relaxing. "Sure, kiddo. I've got a few minutes while I wait for the detective to show up for my report." "You control any bamboo, right? Even processed stuff like your costume?" Bamboo Man raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, though the costume's special made. Ren's too far from the original for me to use." Izuku got caught up in thinking about how a support company might have made the hero's costume raw enough to use with his quirk, but soft enough to wear without getting a rash. Did he have to be in direct contact with the bamboo fibers to control them? Could he wear a softer undershirt to protect his skin? And if he didn't have to be in direct contact with bamboo to control it, why not use bamboo shurikens? Or he could have a cape or carry a swath of the bamboo fabric on him to function as both a shield when stiffened or a shock blanket when soft. It could even function as a spineboard or stretcher in a rescue scenario. Izuku's tears were long forgotten as he contemplated the possibilities. He hardly even noticed when he was pulled back into shared control of their body. He did hear when Akikyo parroted one of his questions to the hero. "Do you have to touch bamboo to control it? Because if you don't, you could have a cape or carry a shock blanket made of the same stuff as your costume and have it double as a shield. Or a stretcher if you get called out for disaster relief." The hero stared at them and blinked several times. I have to be in contact with it to control it, but that's actually a pretty good idea there. I always wanted a cape back in school, but my teachers vetoed it as a choke hazard," the hero said, giving them a grin and a shrug. "Support would totally get behind a shock blanket though. Thanks. You got an intelligence quirk or something?" Izuku shrank back again, remembering who he was compared to the person before him. The second Bamboo Man heard he was quirkless, he'd dismiss everything they'd just said. Izuku got a strong impression of an eye roll from Akikyo. Then his friend said, "No intelligence quirk. I've just been studying to go into analysis and support my whole life." In their head, Akikyo said, "You don't have to out yourself every time someone brings up quirks, kid." He never asked if you had one at all, just if you had an intelligence one. Let him make his own assumptions. That way you'll establish your credibility before they have a chance to be bigoted. Some of them won't care if they already know what you're capable of when they find out. Meanwhile, Bamboo Man smiled. "Awesome. Can't wait for you to graduate. I'll tell my agency to keep an eye out for you. What's your name?" "Midoriya Izuku," Izuku said himself. He still felt nervous and uncertain, but Akikyo had made his point. His analyses weren't worthless. Even if he never became a hero, his work could help people or at least help people help people. "Come on, Izuku. Let's head home. Your mom'll be making dinner soon. I think she said it was mapo tofu tonight, Akikyo said, giving him a mental head pat and hair ruffle. Izuku smiled and waved a goodbye to Bamboo Man, who was already walking off to greet the detective. Yeah, that sounds like a plan. Izuku walked out of the underground clinic 5,000 yen richer than he went in. The whole underground quirk analysis thing was surprisingly lucrative. A lot of people had problems with their quirks. The guy he just helped, Darby, had an amazingly powerful fire quirk, but it burned him too if he overused it. His inherited cold tolerance didn't help him either. Izuku hadn't asked why he was overusing his quirk enough to look like overcooked bacon, but he'd recommended the man aim for precision with smaller, concentrated flames over large, sweeping moves, citing the benefits both to Darby and the man's surroundings. Darby was also supposed to test if his quirk could produce flames farther away from his skin or adjust the temperature to not be full-on cremation every single use. Situations like Darby's were why eugenics got banned in the first place. Some things just weren't fixable. Thankfully, most of the clients he'd seen so far were easier to help. Recommending a sun lamp for a man with a reptilian quirk who almost lost a toe last winter, proposing a dietary change for someone with a crystal transformation quirk whose crystals were turning brittle, things like that. Simple fixes to think of when looked at from an outside perspective. It really wasn't worth charging anyone. Cross and Cheshire didn't seem to agree with his assessment, but they didn't outright argue. Instead, they simply slipped his cut of the consult fee into his bag when he wasn't looking. Given the whole don't owe anyone anything rule in the underground, Izuku stopped fighting it after the third time. He just accepted that he was getting paid for his hobby. People were willing to pay him to do something he loved. And wasn't that a novelty? At least it kept him in spending money. His stash from selling his All Might merch wasn't going to last him forever, after all. Izuku debated what to spend the unexpected income on as he walked home. The summer twilight was the perfect temperature, and he reveled in the quiet that came after all the day workers had rushed home. Still streets meant he was less likely to be snuck up on. Maybe I should save up for a new coat this winter? I've put on enough muscle, I don't know if my old one will fit anymore. Aldera's Gakuren barely fits now, Izuku muttered to himself. He tried his old uniform on the other day, because school started back next week. The jacket that once swallowed him now left little to the imagination and restricted his movement. Izuku probably should buy a new uniform jacket before going back to class. The last thing he needed was anyone, Kaken, thinking he was thinking too highly of himself and trying to show off. He just needed to lay low until spring. Then he was graduating from that hellhole and never looking back. And then, well, he'd figure that out when he got there. He yawned and stretched before shifting into a jog when he got out of the industrial district. Normally, he wasn't a fan of staying out this late, but his mom got called in for some emergency at her job. So, it's not like she was expecting him for dinner. He debated picking something up from a corner store on his way home instead of cooking. He shouldn't skip meals, and whatever the store stocked had to be better than the instant ramen Izuku knew himself well enough to see in his future if he went straight home. Izuku just about talked himself into detouring to pick up a beef bowl when he heard the scuff of shoes on concrete. Izuku froze out of habit and glanced over his shoulder. No one behind him. He cast his eyes about and tilted his head when he heard the sound again, this time followed by a laugh. There was something in it, the sound that reminded Izuku of his classmates. Izuku quietly took his Mako hoodie from his backpack and put it on, pulling the hood over his head. Then he donned the medical mask that perpetually lived in his shorts pocket. Hopefully, if it was someone from Aldera, this was enough of a disguise. Though it sounded like they'd already found a victim. Izuku pursed his lips as he crept closer to the noise. These perpetrators hadn't even bothered to drag their target into an alley. They were in the middle of the sidewalk when Izuku reached the next corner. 3 unfamiliar teens surrounded a fourth who was already on the ground. The 3 bullies were taking turns kicking at him. One of them was clearly using a quirk to turn his shoe and pant leg to stone before each impact. Izuku stared in disbelief for a second. He knew this wasn't an oft-patrolled neighborhood, but come on. Did they really expect no one to see or hear them? Izuku's question was answered when one bully's kick momentarily uncovered the victim's face. Izuku caught sight of purple hair and a muzzle. The latter explained why the victim hadn't made a sound. He almost definitely had cuts from the edges digging into his face. If they made him puke or cough up blood while wearing that thing, the kid could suffocate. Not on Izuku's watch. He snarled silently behind his mask but resisted the urge to rush in. Instead, he turned on his burner phone's GPS and placed a call to 119 before returning it to his pocket. Then he picked up 2 empty beer bottles from the trash pushed against the building's wall. He called on all the tips Akikyo had given him on appearing confident and dangerous. He relaxed his shoulders, lifted his chin, and schooled his face into a mask of indifference, not unlike the one Darby always wore. Izuku belonged here, and he was not someone to mess with. Izuku hefted the bottles to get a feel for them before stalking around the corner and toward the group. His first throw was off a little bit, hitting Stone Transformer's shoulder instead of his head, and the bottle didn't break until it fell to the ground, but it still got his point across. "You really want to cause trouble on our turf?" Izuku bluffed, tossing his remaining bottle in one hand. Really, the closest gang territory was 3 blocks over, but he only knew that from Cheshire's warnings about what areas to avoid. He hoped these 3 didn't have that knowledge. The 3 froze when they spotted him. One of them looked panicked as Izuku's words sank in, but the other 2 still looked like they were spoiling for a fight. The kid on the ground eyed him warily. "Who are you?" one of the bullies demanded. "What, are you this villain's friend or something?" Since it wasn't Rock Transformer, and this guy didn't have any external tells as to his quirk, Izuku declined to answer. Izuku was fairly certain the purple-haired kid was not a villain though. Probably had a villainous quirk that these 3 used as an excuse to attack him, but Izuku had seen stray kittens that were more threatening than their victim. When the ringleader didn't back down, Izuku pulled on his memories of Akikyo's smile and bared his teeth. Then he shifted into the fighting stance Mamoru had drilled into him and raised both hands. The already scared bully took a step back, but the 2 others took a step forward. Rock Transformer moved to attack first, running forward while throwing a wide, telegraphed punch. Izuku saw it coming a mile away and sidestepped the move. The bully was a lot larger up close, and Izuku had to dodge 2 more hits and take a glancing blow to his right shoulder before the guy overextended. When he did, Izuku took full advantage to kick at the bully's ankle. While his opponent righted his balance, Izuku circled around him just enough to kick out his right knee. As the bully stumbled, Izuku smashed the second bottle over the guy's head. Rather than wait to see if that was enough, Izuku threw a quick punch with his free hand, hitting the back of the guy's neck. He kept one eye on the other bullies as Stone Transformer fell, thankfully clear of the glass shards now coating the pavement. "Anyone else want to try?" Izuku asked, letting just a hint of his irritation into his voice as he adjusted his grip on the broken bottle's neck. It made a much more threatening weapon now, not that Izuku intended to use it. The scared bully shook his head frantically. "Come on man, this ain't worth it. Let's just go." The ringleader looked furious, and Izuku had a sinking feeling he wasn't going to back down. So, Izuku offered another incentive. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and waved it where they could see the in-progress call to "I already called the police." That was enough for the scaredy cat to turn tail and run. Ringleader responded by carefully bending down to pick up a handful of glass shards. "Doesn't matter," he said, voice worryingly even. "This'll only take a minute." Izuku thought he was prepared for whatever the guy might throw at him, but he was not, in fact, prepared for the bully to literally throw a shard of glass at him. It traveled far faster than it had any right to. Izuku barely managed to twist enough to avoid it impaling his arm. It still sliced through his hoodie sleeve before burying itself in the pavement several meters behind him. Izuku stared wide-eyed at Ringleader. Was that a speed acceleration quirk? A projectile quirk? Either way, Izuku was screwed out here in the open, and the corner was too far away to risk turning his back on the guy. Izuku took a risk and threw the broken bottle at Ringleader and swung his backpack off his shoulders to use as a makeshift shield as he rushed forward. If he couldn't get away safely, closing to render ranged weapons useless was the next best option. Ringleader dodged the bottle and threw another shard. Izuku tried to move out of the way but didn't quite make it. The shard ripped through the backpack to slice a shallow line across Izuku's left side. Another shard flew through the center of Izuku's backpack, and he was only saved from a potentially fatal hit by the clang of it spearing his aluminum water bottle. Then Izuku was finally close enough to throw his backpack in the guy's face and go low to punch his opponent's stomach. Ringleader doubled over but brought another glass shard around to stab it into the outside of Izuku's right calf before he could back away. Izuku bit back a cry as Ringleader yanked the shard back out, and that leg buckled. Before Izuku could think of getting away, Ringleader had the blooded shard only a few centimeters from his throat. Izuku froze. Ringleader smirked and panted. "Not so tough now, are you?" Izuku's brain refused to work as his eyes zeroed in on that blooded piece of glass. Why had he even thought he could hold his own in a fight? He'd only worked with Mamoru for a month. Did he really think that was enough time to make him more than a useless duh? A tall boy with purple hair suddenly had one arm wrapped under the bully's right arm, the arm holding that dangerous glass, and the other wrapped around the guy's neck from behind, pulling him back and away. His attempted chokehold was weak, and the bully was quickly twisting free, bringing that deadly glass around toward the victim. Izuku stumbled back to his feet and grabbed the bully's wrist. He squeezed and twisted until the glass fell from Ringleader's grip. Then Izuku punched him in the face. The purple-haired kid released his hold as Izuku dragged the bully's head down by his hair to meet Izuku's knee. That finally put him down, and Izuku dropped him unceremoniously onto the glass-littered ground. He and the purple-haired kid stared at Ringleader for a moment as they panted, just to make sure it was really over. Then Izuku glanced back at the other bully, who was also staying down. Good. Then he turned his attention to their victim. A thin line of blood was dripping from one side of the muzzle, and there was bruising blooming across what was visible of his right cheek. He was hunched over too. Most of those blows likely landed on his abdomen and back. "Here, sit down," Izuku said, sweeping a section of sidewalk clear with his shoe. "I've got a first aid kit in my bag. Might be able to cut that thing off of you with my bandage scissors." He retrieved his backpack, which was now half-soaked from his leaking water bottle. When he opened his bag, he found his earbuds had also been a casualty. He held up the severed cord and whined, "I just got those last week." A soft chuckle behind him reminded him of his purpose, and he hastily pulled out the thankfully waterproofed first aid kit. As he turned back to the victim, he saw the Ringleader bully twitch. Izuku and the victim both froze. "Actually, let me tie them up first." "Here." Izuku handed the kid his first aid kit before hastily retrieving his earbuds. At least he'd get one last use out of them. 5 minutes later, Ringleader's hands and fingers were tied together behind the guy's back with several loops of earbud cord to prevent him picking up another piece of glass. There hadn't been enough cord for Rock Transformer, and Izuku wasn't certain he'd trust the guy not to break out of that anyway. So, he got tied up with his own belt. Satisfied with the restraints, Izuku finally joined the victim. The purple-haired kid had already disinfected and bandaged a few scrapes on his hands and one on his arm that he was just now pulling his sleeve back down over. Izuku dug out the bandage scissors and showed them to the teen. "May I?" The teen scrutinized him with lavender eyes before finally nodding, though he still tensed up as Izuku crouched beside him. Izuku moved slowly as he tugged at various places on the muzzle until finding one with enough give to slide the blunted end of the scissors under the strap. The purple-haired teen winced as Izuku started sawing at the thick polyester weave. It was slow going, but it did cut. As the horrid contraption fell away, Izuku finally heard sirens way off in the distance. Was it a busy evening, or did they just take that long to respond to calls in this part of town? "Thanks." Izuku looked back to the victim, who was now holding a wad of gauze to his bleeding face. "Any time." The victim glanced back up at him. "Why'd you step in?" Izuku raised an eyebrow and met those lavender eyes again. "Why'd you?" Izuku had honestly expected the kid to run while the bullies were distracted. It's what every other kid he'd ever helped had done. The purple-haired boy looked away, continuing to dab at one of the cuts on his face. Izuku politely ignored how the boy's hands shook. Seemed like the right thing to do. Izuku grinned behind his mask and started disinfecting a few cuts the muzzle straps had left on the other teen's scalp. "The last time I saw someone getting hurt, I waited too long, and they died before help came. I couldn't let that happen again." Shinso tensed at that admission before relaxing again. That. Esigus, man. Yeah. After a minute of painfully awkward silence, Izuku couldn't take it anymore. What's your name? Izuku asked, trying to get the teen's mind off of everything that had just happened. Shinso, the boy replied. Izuku handed the bottle of disinfectant to Shinso when he gestured for it. You really with a gang? Izuku laughed. No, that was a bluff. After one last check of Shinso's head, Izuku decided he'd found everything there. He'd let the paramedics deal with Shinso's bruises and any potential internal bleeding. There wasn't much he could do about those. So, Izuku finally sat himself down and checked his own injuries. As expected, the cuts on his side and leg and the scrapes on his knuckles had already sealed over with green-black. Shinso raised his eyebrows at the sight. Your quirk? Izuku shook his head as he dug through the first aid kit for a packet of butterfly sutures. Nah, this is my friend's. He paused for a moment, thinking, before he added, just in case the cops ask, no, I did not use a quirk during that fight. The last stitch applied, Izuku moved on to quickly wrap the wounds. What's yours? Shinso bristled and glanced over at the muzzle before looking down at the pavement. Barely above a whisper, he said, brainwashing. Izuku smiled as his mind raced through so many possible uses for such a quirk. That's so cool. Perfect for hostage negotiating or ending a villain fight before it even begins. Shinso stared at Izuku as if he'd sprouted a second head, and Izuku realized Shinso probably didn't get people reacting positively to his quirk that often. Izuku decided to make it extra clear he had no problems with the teen in that department. I have a friend who has a possession quirk. It's actually part of theirs that helps me heal faster. Lingering effect. Does yours have any odd effects like that? If anything, Shinso looked even more dumbfounded. Not that I know of? I mean, it sorta helps with anxiety, but what you really don't care. Izuku started picking up their trash and putting the unused supplies back in the first aid kit as he hummed. Nope. You seem like a chill guy. I'm guessing by that thing, Izuku gestured toward the discarded muzzle, that if you wanted to use your quirk on me you could have by now. Quirks like yours and my friends don't deserve the bad rep they've gotten. Shinso grimaced. Didn't used to be so bad until Dictator. Izuku nodded in agreement. The puppeteer villain had made public opinion of control-type quirks so much worse. They put it on you? Izuku asked, waving the first aid kit toward the bullies. No, that's the Fosters. Izuku bristled and pulled his burner phone out. He hung up the call to 119 that he'd frankly forgotten about and turned off the GPS before pulling up a blank text. Give me your number real quick. Shinso did not give Izuku his number. He gave Izuku a deadpan stare. Izuku sighed and explained, I know someone who has a safe house. They offered to take me in when they thought my folks were hurting me, and I can vouch for them. If things get bad or continue like this, you have options. Shinso studied Izuku's face for a minute before giving his number. Izuku sent him a short text with Cheshire's burner number and alias. Shinso pulled out his phone as it dinged. If you call or text her, be sure to tell her I sent you. That done, he stood up careful not to put much weight on his injured leg and packed away his kit. After a moment's thought, he picked up the shard of glass with his blood on it too. Best not to leave any blood with hints of slime behind. He stared at the shard in surprise when the smallest amount of green collected on the surface beside his thumb. Izuku felt a firm pressure, then the slime was back under his skin where it belonged. Here. He couldn't manipulate it at will. He'd already tried in the past, but the slime returned to him if Akikyo wasn't around. That was good to know. It seemed to have a much shorter range to draw from though. Izuku shook his head and started limping away. He could analyze that once he got home. He'd have to skip the corner store today. The enhanced healing exhaustion was going to make getting home hard enough without adding day tours. At least the train station wasn't too far. If he was careful, he should be able to make it home without reopening anything or falling asleep. The sirens were fairly close now, so Shinso shouldn't have to wait long either. Shinso called after him, Hey, what's your name? Oh, yeah. That might be helpful if he had to contact Cheshire. He'd been thinking about names ever since he'd written green on Cross's medical forms. If he wanted this whatever it was to last more than 1 or 2 encounters, he needed a better alias than that. He and Akikyo had debated it off and on over the summer, and Izuku had never found something he liked. Ringleader's words from the beginning of the fight gave Izuku an idea, though. He turned to call back to his new friend, "It's Neisho." Maybe it was a bit childish, but the grin and snort the name got out of Shinso were worth it. Izuku was never going to be a hero, but at least he could still make people smile when he saved them. Getting stabbed in the leg was exactly the incentive Izuku needed to start investigating getting his hands on some armor. Ideally, he'd just buy it, but he was semi-scrawny, still growing, hopefully, and didn't have a contact in the underground smuggling circuit until Akikyo was back in town. So, that left him with either cobbling together something himself or ordering bits and pieces from the internet and having to update his protective gear as he grew. It took Izuku 3 hours of browsing motorcycle clothing websites for the right balance of armor versus flexibility to realize that he was picking out his vigilante costume. What he'd done the other day with Shinso was, well, not technically vigilantism, but everyone else was going to peg it as vigilantism. He was, sort of, a vigilante. That fact left him breathless for a minute. Almost of their own accord, Izuku's fingers moved to pull up a web search on Japanese vigilantes. Pop Step, Crawler, Stendhal, and Knuckle Duster were the most recent results. Izuku spent hours poring over the information he could find on them, taking notes on tricks and gear they'd used. Learning parkour and acquiring some sort of climbing gear were quickly circled and underlined at the top of his list. Knives had a lot of utility too, from cutting strips of fabric to make bandages, to freeing hostages or himself if trapped, to scaring off, or hurting but he really didn't want to, aggressors, to potentially opening a wound for Akikyo to quickly use their blood like they did in that one fight. He shied away from that last thought after a moment. Akikyo didn't want him to die, and being willing to proactively hurt himself seemed like a slippery slope. With lingering disquiet, Izuku shifted his focus from that line of thought to his frustration that there wasn't more information available on the Narahata vigilantes. The media coverage of everything that happened in that city was spotty, sometimes not mentioning the vigilantes at all when another article covering the same event mentioned them being involved but gave few details. The only thing all outlets seemed to agree on was all of the vigilantes seeming to disappear a year or 2 ago. Izuku frowned in disappointment and kept digging, this time into the villain organization connected to those events. He wasn't planning to research them, but then he read exactly what instant villains were: people unwittingly dosed with trigger. An hour of searching, learning about self-destructing test tube-grown villains, next-level villains, and the Sky Egg incident left Izuku with more questions than answers and mounting unease. The villain factory had been thoroughly dismantled years ago, so where had the trigger at Akikyo's friend's party come from? He only worried more when he checked for other recent trigger cases. They were spotty, happening in clusters of less than 10, then nothing for several months before the next cluster in a completely different prefecture, sometimes jumping islands. Most of the press releases about the cases explained the trigger away as small batches smuggled in from out of country. If Izuku wasn't so paranoid, he might have written them off too. But that part of his mind that always looked over his shoulder expecting to see his classmates chasing him had him searching the victims' names next, already suspecting the worst. 1 or 2 from each batch went missing in the span of months between trigger cases. But unlike Narahata, none of these had turned back up. He only came up for air when his stomach growled loudly, jolting him free of his anxiety-inducing research spiral. Izuku glanced at the time on his laptop and closed out his tabs. He'd lost track of time, he'd missed his usual dinner time and was supposed to be on his evening run right now. He sighed and stretched his arms over his head, pleased to note his newest scar wasn't as tight and stiff as he'd feared it would be. After a moment's debate, he decided to run first, then grab some food on the way home. His mom was working late again, and he didn't feel like cooking. Thanks to a heat wave, it was still unbearably hot despite the late hour. So, Izuku took advantage of his mom's absence and changed into a tank top and shorts before heading out. He carefully avoided the area he'd run into Kaken. Izuku's scars twinged thinking about him, and Izuku pushed himself to run a bit faster, ignoring the occasional pang from his half-healed stab wound. The shallow cut on his side had finished healing overnight. He didn't slow until he reached Dagobah Beach, where he reduced his pace to a jog. The stretches of sand between trash mounds had grown steadily until only the largest items remained. The refrigerator, a cluster of washing machines, half of an industrial stove, the rusted chassis of some vehicle, a tractor tire wider than Izuku was tall, and a few unidentifiable chunks of twisted metal. Izuku eyed the trash, knowing he and Akikyo were going to finally finish the beach next time they hung out. Izuku was tempted to move the items himself, but if something went wrong, it was better to have a spotter on hand. Izuku nodded to himself and turned off of the coastal sidewalk to make his way back into the city and loop toward home. He was just debating whether he felt like Nejima Yakitori or a Yakudan when he felt a slight tug throughout his body. Izuku paused for a moment to orient himself. A second tug had him smiling and changing course for a small, overgrown park. The neglected trees and bushes provided just enough cover to hide both himself and Akikyo from passers-by. Izuku shoved his way through springy branches to stumble into the cramped clearing Akikyo was hiding in. "Hey, Akikyo," Izuku whispered as he sat on the ground beside his friend. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Thought I'd get one last visit in before your school starts back up. Plus, I need to introduce you to the broker I found, but that can wait a few days. How have you been?" Akikyo asked, eyeing Izuku's exposed shoulders. Izuku rarely wore tank tops for a reason. Both shoulders were a gnarled mess of scar tissue from burns both old and new, though the ugly handprint on his left shoulder was by far the worst. Izuku had a feeling Kaken hadn't accounted for Izuku's lack of layers when he'd inflicted that one. At Aldera, he always had 3 layers of fabric between his skin and any burning hands. Izuku shook the thought away and turned his head to inspect the healed burn himself. There was almost a faint green tinge to the scar tissue, but Izuku could never decide whether he was imagining it or not. He rolled his shoulder and met his friend's concerned gaze with a sheepish grin. "It's feeling a lot better, and I haven't had any issues with it restricting my movement. How are things on your end?" He decided not to mention his newer injuries just yet. Akikyo grinned. "Business is good, and I had an idea for one last experiment we can run if you're up for it." "Oh. Yeah. So, I was thinking about my time limit before quirk withdrawal kicks in, then I realized we never checked if our week-long stints affected that." Izuku sat up a bit straighter. Akikyo was right. They totally should have checked that. How had Izuku missed it? If an extended possession allowed Akikyo to go longer between possessions, that could give both of them more freedom. He ignored the pang he felt at the idea of seeing less of Akikyo. There were more important things to focus on, like the fact that Izuku's classes started in 5 days. If they did this now, Akikyo was going to be stuck sitting in class with him for a few days. But if they didn't do it now, there wasn't another good chance for several months. "I'm fine with a couple boring days if you are," Akikyo said, making Izuku realize he'd been mumbling. After blushing in embarrassment, Izuku agreed. By now, possession was pretty mundane for Izuku, but already thinking on Akikyo's quirk, Izuku found himself paying attention to the feeling of slime worming its way through his muscles, veins, and organs, slowly sinking into bones and nerves, and filling all the spaces in between. He wondered not for the first time how Akikyo's quirk allowed for all that without damaging his host. Or maybe there was some injury inherent to the possession process, but the brief numbness and accelerated healing that came with the quirk compensated for it. Izuku was still brainstorming when Akikyo finished slipping inside and connected to his brain. "Whoa, you're thinking a mile a minute. Give a guy some warning." Izuku chuckled in the safety of their head. "Sorry." Akikyo rolled their eyes and grinned. "I suppose I should be used to it by now. After all, my quirk is one of the best out there," he crowed, puffing their chest out. Izuku mentally shoved Akikyo and stood them up. "No arguments here." They took exactly one step before Akikyo stopped them. The slime in Izuku's leg shifted around, then Akikyo asked in bewilderment, "Kid, how the F did you get a piece of glass buried in your calf?" "There's still a piece in there?" Izuku asked before catching himself. "I mean, I have no idea? That's so weird." Akikyo sent him an impression of a very unimpressed face as he sat their body back down and turned their leg to look at the half-healed wound. Sure. Give me a minute to work it out, then we'll get back to whatever fights you've been picking. Izuku sputtered but couldn't come up with a satisfactory excuse. So, he settled back and watched Akikyo work as his friend muttered something about ungodly pain tolerances. Izuku could feel the slime shifting around under his skin before the area numbed. He pushed down his queasiness at the sight of the closed skin of his leg reopening. Their black blood oozed from the wound, pushing a small shard of brown bottle glass out to fall onto the grass. Akikyo picked up the shard as their blood retreated and the wound resealed itself with a thin line of black. A wordless question brushed against Izuku's mind, and Izuku pulled up the memory of the fight, replaying it in as much detail as he could. Memory sharing was still difficult, but they discovered it was easier if the person who'd lived it willingly replayed the memory rather than just trying to shove the knowledge at their counterpart. Izuku could usually manage one or two before getting a headache, but even one was mentally taxing. The tiring part came from Akikyo pressing closer in his mind to get a better feel for the memory. Instead of feeling like they were sitting side by side separate and distinct, they almost completely overlapped. Akikyo was him, and he was Akikyo. It wasn't exactly uncomfortable, and it was the most efficient method of memory sharing they had. But Izuku disliked the disorientation and eroded mental walls that always came after. Izuku rubbed at their eyes as their minds sifted back apart. He really wanted a nap. Dinner first, then we can sleep, Akikyo said as they stood back up and started walking toward the closest takeout restaurant. After a few minutes of companionable silence, he added, "Nice takedown of that stone transformation thug, and your intimidation tactics weren't half bad either. You need to get better at gauging threats though. Unknowns are dangerous. If you'd hit the leader first, I think you might have made it out unscathed. That guy was an unlucky matchup." "I know. I was actually looking at ordering some gear earlier. To protect me if I run into a person like that again. I'll show you once we get home." Izuku happily rambled about his research into protective gear and vigilantism while they waited for their triple order of food to be ready. Unfortunately, Akikyo couldn't offer any insight into where the trigger he'd been exposed to had come from. The man was appropriately freaked out when he heard about how some instant villain victims had later been kidnapped and turned into next-level villains and how there was a suspiciously similar pattern happening again. "Don't worry about me, kid. Low profile is my middle name. Especially since we started doing this." The slime under their skin shifted minutely, and Izuku grinned. The sensation had grown more comfortable over their months of shared time. "It's nice not leaving victims behind everywhere I go anymore. If someone was trying to find me, they'll have had a hard time following my trail the last 8 months." "That's good. I'd be pretty worried if you just up and vanished," Izuku admitted. Something warm flowed through their connection, and Akikyo grumbled something about Izuku being unbearably sappy. They were distracted then by their to-go order being finished. Neither said anything else until they were halfway home. "So, Neisho, here?" Izuku blushed a little. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. "And besides, it fits, doesn't it?" "Yeah, I guess it does," Akikyo said reluctantly and not at all fondly. The rest of the evening was spent eating, staying off their healing leg, and going over vigilante suit options. Akikyo had the brilliant suggestion of painting his motorcycle gear after ordering it or finding a contact in the underground with a color change quirk to make it harder to track back to Izuku. He also recommended waiting to order the suit until talking to Jiran. Akikyo wasn't sure what sort of supplies the broker might be able to get a hold of. Oh yeah, Jiran was the broker Akikyo had hired to look for local trainers. The guy wanted to meet Izuku in person and check the quality of his payments before finalizing the deal though. Hence Akikyo's early return. Izuku was fine with paying in analysis again, though he was a bit leery of giving analysis of heroes to a man known to associate with villains. Akikyo and him didn't quite argue, but they debated Izuku's stance for the better part of a day, even while they were walking to their meeting with said broker. "I'm just saying, you should play it as having a minor analysis quirk that requires seeing the subject and their quirk in person and being able to ask questions. That'll cover most of your bases if you really can't stomach the possibility of one of those show ponies getting hurt." Izuku made a face as he adjusted his hoodie and mask. "You know, not all heroes are like that. Enough of them are." A mental image of All Might and Izuku standing on a roof was pressed into Izuku's mind, followed by an image of the casualty report from Endeavor's last villain apprehension. Izuku wilted a little under his friend's points. All Might hurting me doesn't mean he's a bad hero. Everyone does that. Izuku ignored a Kikyo growl and the wash of disagreement and protectiveness that came with it. Endeavor, you're right about though. That guy almost endangers more civilians than the villains he fights. Izuku tried not to think about the article he'd found on Endeavor's brief stint in Narahata or how he turned an entire street into a fiery vortex, all in an attempt to stop one villain. He almost killed a vigilante in the process. Or two. The article hadn't been terribly clear on that point, only that Endeavor had stood down when Midnight incapacitated the villain before him. They only stopped bickering when their destination came into view. The hole-in-the-wall cafe long didn't scream place to hold illegal deals, but what did Izuku know? Stepping inside, the duo looked around before Akikyo spotted their man sitting in a corner booth smoking a cigarette. Izuku wrinkled his nose at the sight, but Akikyo smoothed the reaction away. You going to go over there or what, Green? Izuku nodded subtly. Green. Right. Because Akikyo hadn't known about Izuku's new name when he talked to Jiran, he'd mentioned his friend as Green. At least that firmly kept his vigilante self separate from his quirk analysis dealer self, right? Oh, and don't mention you're quirkless. Like at all. Izuku froze before Akikyo got them walking again a split second later. Not that he cares, but someone in the area's expressed interest in acquiring a quirkless person, the younger the better, and the buyers on his client list. Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. Then why on earth are we meeting him? Because he's the best at what he does, and he only mentioned the quirkless thing after I'd already set up this meeting. Backing out then would have been suspicious as hell. If anyone asks about your quirk, play it off as analysis or just chew them out and say it's none of their business. Izuku swallowed and sent an impression of a nod to his co-pilot. He could do this. He needed a new trainer and support gear. He had to do this. Izuku took a deep breath and carefully schooled his expression into something unconcerned and confident. Akikyo made one or two minor adjustments as they continued to approach the booth. His friend's unspoken approval of his improved acting made the confidence less feigned. Stopping in front of the corner booth, Izuku cleared his throat. Jiran, I presume. The silver-haired man leaned back in his chair, looking him up and down over his glasses. Izuku returned the favor, wondering at the man's odd choice of formal wear. A purple suit? Really? He thought someone in the underworld would go for a less conspicuous outfit. After a few moments, pink eyes caught on Izuku's green. Jiran smiled around his cigarette and gave a small bow from his seat. Green. Izuku gave a short bow of his own and sat on the bench across from the man. Jiran leaned forward to rest his elbows on the table and steepled his fingers. So, Green, I hear you're looking to learn to fight. Having already decided with Akikyo what to tell the man, Izuku pulled his hoodie and shirt just far enough to expose the edge of one of the older burn scars on his right shoulder. Once the sly man's eyes registered the mark, Izuku let the fabric fall back into place. I'm tired of being a punching bag for others. I want to be able to do more than run or sit there and take it. Jiran hummed and tapped some ash from the end of his cigarette. There are a lot of places you can learn self-defense legally. Izuku shook their head. Those only teach so much. Legally, I'm supposed to be a good victim and wait for a hero or cop to save me. But not all men are created equal, not everyone gets saved, he said, voice dropping to a whisper. Akikyo mentally nudged him, reminding Izuku that he was there. And you're done waiting for a savior, Jiran concluded, exhaling a puff of smoke. Izuku swallowed and met Jiran's eyes with steely resolve. The broker had bought it. The best lies had some truth in them, after all. Some part of Izuku taunted him, saying there hadn't been any lie in the first place. Izuku shoved that part down with his nightmares. I'm being realistic. All right, kid. I'll put a word out. Might even know a person or two willing to play teacher. Are you good for it though? That was Izuku's cue to pull a pocket notebook from his hoodie. After much debate over morals and ethics, Izuku and Akikyo had settled on giving Jiran a copy of Izuku's analysis of a local repeat villain. He wasn't terribly dangerous due to his strictly sticking to thefts and his tendency to commit crimes along very powerful heroes' patrol routes, but he had evaded capture 5 times and counting. Spring Step, both the alias of the man and the name of his quirk, could make incredible leaps and always land safely on his feet, provided he could visualize his landing location. Why the man never tried utilizing it in combat, Izuku couldn't fathom, but his escapes were quite entertaining to watch. Izuku passed the notebook across the table and said, "I had the pleasure of witnessing one of his chases a few weeks ago. Wonderful quirk, though poorly utilized." Jiran thumbed through the pages, one eyebrow rising as he read. "Not bad, kid. Do you take requests?" the broker asked, eyeing Izuku more seriously. Izuku stiffened a bit before Akikyo eased the tension from his muscles. Right, he wasn't alone. He could do this. "There are some limitations on my analysis," Izuku said, glancing away. He didn't outright lie and claim his analysis was a quirk, but if someone assumed that from his wording, that was on them. "I do my best work if I can see someone's quirk use in person, and if I can ask them questions, I can go even further." Jiran's eyes grew distant in thought. "Interesting." Finally, he nodded. "I can work with that. You got a burner?" Izuku nodded and rattled off his burner phone's number. Jiran grinned as he entered the contact in his phone. A buzz in Izuku's pocket told him he had a new number to add to his as well. "Good. Meet me here same day, same time next week unless I text you otherwise. I'll have someone to train you and someone for you to analyze." Izuku recognized the dismissal and stood. As he turned to walk away, Jiran said, "Looking forward to doing business with you." Izuku glanced back to see the grin on the older man's face. There was something predatory to it. Izuku and Akikyo smiled back in kind, feeling shared satisfaction at the momentary surprise in Jiran's eyes. The broker chuckled and shook his head, muttering, "Where did you even find this kid, Sludge?"